My name is Dr. Adrian Keller, and for the past 3 weeks, I've been the only living soul on this stretch of Greenland's ice shelf. My colleagues boarded the last supply plane back to Copenhagen after the logistics team pulled our funding early. Fuel shortages, they said. Political disputes, not enough resources to keep every station running through the winter. But I refused to abandon my work. I'm a glaciologist, trained to read the frozen earth like a book, to pull secrets from ancient ice. Each drill core is a story, a chronology of storms, volcanic ash, even the breath of civilizations long gone, trapped in bubbles. Leaving without finishing would mean throwing away months of effort, data that could rewrite models of climate history. I told them I'd be fine. I told them solitude didn't scare me. I lied a little. The outpost is nothing more than a prefab metal shack bolted into the permafrost about the size of a shipping container. A narrow bunk, a heater that hums and clanks, a small workbench cluttered with notebooks and the drilling rig out back, its frame half buried in drifts. Outside my thin walls, endless snowfields stretching to the horizon, pale blue by day, bruised purple at dusk, and at night, sometimes, auroras rippling like torn silk. Beautiful, yes, but also crushing. The silence here doesn't comfort. It presses in until the blood in your ears becomes the only sound. Even now, sitting at my desk, I feel it, that pressure of emptiness, a stillness too perfect. My pen scratches against paper, and the sound feels violent. Every noise does. Yesterday, I swear I heard something else, something that didn't belong. A low vibration, too deep for the wind, rising from beneath the ice. I shut off the heater, held my breath, listened. It faded. Maybe it was my imagination, or maybe not. I've been drilling deeper than the others before me dared, down past 3,500 meters of ancient ice. There are layers here untouched for tens of thousands of years. The drill bit screeches when it hits new strata, then eases as the core comes free, glossy and blue under my lamp. I label it, store it, and feel a strange satisfaction. But yesterday, the ice changed. The sample was darker, streaked with something that like veins. Not dirt, not volcanic ash, something organic. The air inside the shack smelled different too when I brought the core in. Not just cold, not just ozone. A faint, metallic tang, almost like blood. I told myself it was contamination, rust maybe, from the drill, but the odor clung to the back of my throat, made me swallow against nausea. I kept working anyway. That's what I do. Tonight, though, I feel uneasy. The wind has stopped completely, rare here. Without it, the silence feels unnatural. I hear the shack groan, metal popping as it shrinks in the cold, but beneath it, something else. A faint scratching, deep and muffled, like claws dragging against a buried wall. I lean closer to the floorboards. My stomach knots. The sound stops the moment I focus on it. I don't frighten easily. My training insists on rational explanations. Thermal expansion, pressure shifts, the movement of ice under its own colossal weight. But reason falters when the noises begin to repeat at intervals, always when the lights flicker. I check the generator twice. Nothing wrong. The fuel lines are intact, the voltage steady. Still, when I return inside, the lamp on my desk dims and swells like a heartbeat. For a second, I thought I saw a shadow moving across the far wall, though there was nothing in the way of the light. When I finally crawled into bed, exhaustion pressing down on me, the silence seemed to grow teeth. My eyes refused to close. That's when I heard it. A whisper. Clear, low, curling against my ear as if someone leaned over me. Adrian. I shot upright, heart pounding so hard my chest ached. The shack was empty, just my breath steaming in the dim glow of the heater. I told myself it was a dream, a trick of half sleep. But the air tasted wrong, metallic and thick, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had leaned close enough to touch me. I didn't sleep after that. Instead, I sat at the desk until dawn, staring at the core sample on the bench. In the frozen cylinder, the vein-like streaks seemed to shimmer faintly, as if catching light that wasn't there. I blinked, leaned closer. Nothing, just ice. But I kept the sample sealed, unwilling to cut it open yet. Not until I understood what I'd found. The radio crackles sometimes, though I haven't touched it in days. It should be silent unless I transmit. Yet twice now I've heard faint static patterns late at night, almost rhythmic, like breathing. Once, I thought I heard my own voice coming back at me, delayed, repeating words I hadn't said aloud. This place is changing me. Or something in the ice is, and tonight, I'm sure of it, something is moving beneath the station. Day broke gray, with no sun visible, just a smothering lid of clouds. I brewed coffee thick as tar and sat staring at the core sample on my bench. The veins inside it seemed darker now, more distinct, almost branching like roots or capillaries. The ice should have been clear, glass-like at this depth. I wanted to chip off a sliver, run it under the microscope, but something inside me resisted. Instead, I zipped into my parka and stepped outside. The cold hit me with its usual violence, slicing through fabric, biting the moisture from my eyes until they watered. The horizon stretched white in all directions, infinite and merciless. Snow squeaked under my boots as I trudged toward the drill rig. The machine stood silent, rimed with frost, its steel frame bent slightly from the constant freeze-thaw. The wind had died again, and in its absence the world sounded wrong, hollow as if the ice itself was breathing. I crouched beside the borehole, peering down. It yawned like a black throat into the earth. Normally I find comfort in the geometry of my work, measurements, depths, angles, but staring into that shaft this morning, my skin crawled. There was a sound rising from below, not the creak of shifting ice, something wetter, irregular, a pulsing almost like a slow heartbeat muffled under meters of frost. My breath fogged the rim. For a long minute I listened, forcing myself to stay rational. My gloved hand tightened on the drill lever. Pressure pockets, I whispered to myself. Air trapped under strain. Perfectly normal. But then I heard it again. Clearer this time. Not a pulse. Not natural. A scrape, like claws dragging against stone. I staggered back, boots crunching too loud, chest heaving. The sound didn't follow. The hole just gaped silently as if mocking my fear. Back inside the shack, I stripped off gloves with shaking fingers. My breath reeked of adrenaline. I paced back and forth across the cramped floor, eyes darting to the core sample. The veins seemed to shimmer again, faintly luminous in the lamplight. Finally, I forced myself to cut it open. I mounted the core in the vise, brought out my carbide blade, and shaved away a sliver. The crack of ice breaking was sharper than I expected, like a gunshot in the tiny cabin. I held the sliver up to the microscope. At first, I thought the lens had fogged. The structures inside weren't crystals. They twisted like filaments, intricate and branching, organic. My stomach dropped. I adjusted focus. The filaments weren't frozen solid. Some shimmered with faint movement, twitching under magnification. Impossible, I muttered, backing from the scope. My chair skidded into the wall. Nothing alive should exist at this depth, in this age. Not after 30,000 years sealed in permafrost, but I'd seen it. Something was still alive. The radio popped behind me, a crackle, faint. Then, in a hiss of static, Adrian. The same whisper I'd heard at my bedside. I spun, heart hammering. The radio light blinked amber. No hand on the dial. No transmission. Just my name, stretched and warped as if spoken underwater. I yanked the plug from the socket. The hiss died. Silence rushed back in, thick and absolute. That was when the floor shuddered. Not violently, just enough that the mug on my desk rattled and fell, spilling cold coffee. I froze, breath caught, every hair on my arms lifting. Another tremor came, faint but deliberate, and from below, muffled through wood and frost, came that dragging sound again. Claws. I grabbed my boots, slipped them on half-fastened, and bolted outside. The air hit me like knives, but fear drove me further. I circled the shack, scanning the snow. Nothing, just white expanse, smooth and endless. The borehole was silent now, no movement, no sound. But the tracks. I stopped dead. 50 yards from the shack, the snow rippled with indentations, too shallow for crevasses, too wide for fox or hare. They were impressions, as if something massive had shifted beneath the crust, pressing upward. A sinuous trail ran parallel to the horizon, disappearing into fog. I crouched, gloved hand brushing the snow. It was warm there, not surface warmth, but radiating from below. Heat. My rational mind fractured against what I felt in my bones. Something alive was moving under the ice. Something too big, too alien to fit any category I knew. I stumbled back inside, slammed the door, bolted it. My breath came ragged. I told myself I needed data, evidence. My job was to record, to measure, not to panic. But I couldn't shake the image of those rippling tracks stretching away from the station. Hours passed. I wrote notes with a trembling hand, sketched diagrams of the impressions in the snow. I tried the radio again, even reconnected the power. Nothing but static. As night fell, the auroras stirred above. Green ribbons undulated against the black sky, brighter than I'd ever seen them. They filled the cabin with eerie light through the frosted window, shifting shadows across the walls. And then, faint at first, I heard it again. A voice. Not through the radio this time. Through the walls. Adrian. I pressed my back to the bunk, fists clenched. The voice was clearer now, less distorted. It sounded almost human, deep, resonant, but wrong in rhythm, as if someone was learning to speak by imitating me. Adrian, down, with us. The floor vibrated beneath my boots. The lamp pulsed like a heartbeat. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The ice shelf stretched hundreds of kilometers in every direction. No shelter, no rescue, just this station and the thing beneath it. For the first time, true terror gripped me. Not the fear of being alone, not the fear of the cold, but the fear that I was not alone at all, that something buried for eons was stirring, and it knew my name. I told myself I wouldn't run again. If I did, I'd lose control completely. And out here, panic is a death sentence. So I gathered my equipment, seismic sensors, a portable spectrometer, and my field recorder. If something truly lived beneath the ice, then I needed proof. That thought, that scrap of scientific resolve was the only thing keeping me from collapsing. If I documented it, cataloged it, gave it shape and data, maybe it would stop feeling like madness. The borehole loomed like a black wound against the snow. My breath plumed in quick bursts as I crouched beside it, gloved fingers fumbling with the seismic probes. I pressed them into the crust around the shaft, powered the monitor. The line wavered flat at first, then slowly it began to ripple. At first I thought it was background noise, thermal shifting, the usual micro movements, but the frequency stabilized, rhythmic, too steady to be random. Boom, 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 like a heartbeat, slow and vast, echoing from unfathomable depth. I swallowed hard, forced my hand to steady as I switched on the recorder. Seismic resonance detected at borehole 74. Regular intervals approximate BPM 32. My voice cracked on the number. Source undetermined. The ground shivered beneath me, not violently, but enough to feel it through my knees. The monitor spiked, then steadied again. And then came the sound. Not imagined, not muffled through the floorboards of my shack. Real. Rising from the black throat of the borehole, breathing. Long, ragged inhalations, exhalations that fogged the rim with vapor that should not exist. Warm, moist air drifted up from 2 miles below frozen earth. My lungs constricted, every instinct screaming at me to flee, but I forced myself to lean closer. Recorder aimed down the shaft. That was when I saw it. Movement, not at the bottom, too deep to glimpse, but along the inner walls, far down where the light of my headlamp barely reached. A ripple, like something massive shifting just out of sight. A pale glimmer slithered across the ice, gone in an instant. I stumbled back, nearly toppling into the snow. My chest heaved, heart slamming. The recorder slipped from my grip, tumbling against the drift. And then the voice came again, not in my ears this time, inside my skull. Adrian. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It resonated through bone, vibrating behind my eyes. I clutched my temples, gasping. Adrian. Come. Down. I staggered to my feet, ears ringing. My breath came shallow and fast. The borehole seemed to widen, black and endless, drawing me toward it. For a moment, I felt my body leaning, my weight shifting forward as if pulled by invisible hands. The snow beneath my boots crunched ominously close to the rim. No, I croaked, stumbling backward. No. The pull broke. I fell onto my back, panting clouds into the air. Above me, the auroras writhed brighter than ever, streaks of green and violet whipping across the sky in frantic arcs. They pulsed in rhythm with the seismic monitor still screeching beside the hole. The ground heaved again, stronger this time. A low groan echoed across the plain, like the ice shelf itself crying out. Cracks spidered through the snow around the borehole, fissures creeping outward. I scrambled to my feet, grabbed the recorder, and ran for the shack, heart hammering. Inside, I slammed the door and threw the bolt. The tremors continued, faint but steady. The lamp flickered wildly, casting jittering shadows across the walls. I collapsed onto the bunk, chest heaving. Rational, I whispered to myself, over and over. Think rational. Measure. Record. Survive. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that glimmer slithering along the ice. Something vast. Something that should not exist. Hours bled together. I reviewed the seismic data, the recordings, my own frantic notes. The evidence was undeniable. There was life down there. Not bacteria, not frozen microbes, something complex. Intelligent enough to speak or to mimic speech. And it knew me. By nightfall, I heard it again. Not just the voice. Sounds, indistinct at first, then forming words. Adrian, with us forever. The lamp dimmed until the cabin plunged into shadow. The only light was the aurora's green glow through the frosted window, bending across the walls. And in that shifting light, a shadow formed. Not mine. It stretched tall across the far wall, limbs too long, torso wrong in proportion, head tilted unnaturally. My breath caught. The figure swayed, moving though I did not. I backed against the bunk, heart slamming. The shadow's mouth opened. No sound came. Instead, the voice erupted in my skull again, booming this time, shattering rational thought. Down! The floor shook violently, a mug crashing from the shelf. The heater rattled and died, plunging the room into freezing silence. Frost spread instantly across the walls, creeping like veins of ice. I curled against the bunk, clutching the recorder like a talisman. My rational mind, the scientist in me, was dissolving under waves of terror. But some stubborn part remained, whispering, document, witness, survive. The shadow faded as the auroras dimmed, leaving me shivering in blackness. And beneath the cabin, the breathing grew louder. By morning, the cabin felt like a coffin. Frost webbed across the inside of the window panes. My breath puffed white, even with the heater roaring. The generator outside was running, but its output was dropping. The fuel gauge ticked lower than it should have. I barely slept, scribbling notes by flashlight, reviewing the seismic logs until the graphs blurred into nonsense. Every hour, the reading spiked again, rhythmic as a drum beat. The borehole was alive, resonating like the chest cavity of some buried leviathan. I couldn't just sit here. Not anymore. If I didn't act, the shack would become my grave. So I made a decision. I would seal the borehole, flood it with what remained of my drilling fuel, set a charge from the seismic kit, and collapse the shaft. It was crude, reckless, but the thought of that black throat yawning open, breathing, whispering my name, I couldn't bear it another night. I packed quickly. Jerry cans of fuel, a small detonation charge meant for controlled seismic blasts. My recorder still clutched in my pocket. I strapped on my parka and stepped outside. The cold slammed into me, sharp as razors, but the air wasn't silent anymore. It was vibrating. A low hum seemed to rise from the snow itself, rattling my teeth, crawling under my skin. The borehole lay ahead, ringed with fissures like a diseased wound spreading across the ice. I trudged toward it, boots crunching. Each step seemed heavier than the last, as if gravity itself thickened. The hum grew louder, a pressure in my ears, my skull. My vision wavered at the edges. By the time I reached the rim, I was swaying, nauseous. The shaft exhaled a plume of warm mist, and in that fog, faint shapes shifted, arms or tendrils or something I dared not name. They writhed and vanished, leaving only vapor curling upward. Adrian. The voice shivered through the air, not just in my head now. It rattled the metal of the rig, vibrated the ice at my feet. I clenched my jaw, poured fuel into the shaft. The liquid hissed as it hit unseen depths, vanishing in gulps. The smell was acrid, sharp, grounding me for a moment. Human. Real. I set the charge at the rim, hands trembling in their gloves. My breath came ragged, fogging my visor. That was when the snow shifted. Not from the wind, from beneath. A swell rippled outward from the borehole, rolling under my boots like the back of something vast moving just under the crust. The fissures yawned wider, a crack racing toward me. I leapt back just as the ground split where I'd been standing. A chasm gaped open, deep and black hay, moaning as if the ice itself were screaming. I fumbled with the detonator, thumb hovering, one press, and the charge would blow, collapsing the hole. My entire body screamed for me to do it. But then, through the mist rising from the shaft, a shape began to climb. At first I thought it was smoke solidifying, a long, pale limb, jointless, pushing against the rim. Then another, not bone, not flesh, something translucent, glistening, veined with the same filaments I'd seen in the core. The limbs flexed like wet rope, hauling something upward. The air filled with a sound that wasn't sound, a resonance that turned my bones to tuning forks. My knees buckled, my vision blurred, and through it, the voice boomed. With us. I slammed my thumb onto the detonator. The explosion ripped through the shaft with a concussive roar, a geyser of snow and vapor blasting skyward. I was hurled backward, the world flipping end over end. My head struck the ice, stars bursting behind my eyes. When I staggered up, ears ringing, the borehole was gone. A crater smoked where it had been, edges glowing faint from fuel fire before the snow smothered it. Silence fell. My chest heaved. My hands shook. For a moment, a flicker of hope sparked. I'd done it. I'd sealed it. Whatever nightmare writhed below, I'd buried it again. But then, the aurora flared overhead, blinding green-white, brighter than any storm I'd seen. And from deep beneath the ice, miles down, came a rumble so vast it made the air quake, the horizon ripple. The fissures widened further, spreading outward in every direction. The ice shelf groaned, a leviathan stirring in its sleep. And in my skull, louder than ever, the voice returned. Adrian, you cannot seal what was never meant to be sealed. I collapsed to my knees, clutching my head, the world spinning. When the rumble faded, the plain looked unchanged. The crater smoldered, but nothing climbed out. The aurora dimmed to its usual ghostly shimmer. I staggered back to the shack, numb, half-frozen, the detonator still clutched in my hand. My body moved on instinct alone. Inside, I bolted the door, collapsed onto the bunk, and stared at the ceiling, trembling. Had I stopped it, delayed it, or had I only woken something far larger? The seismic monitor on my desk answered. Its line, once pulsing steady, now spiked into frenzy. Something vast was moving beneath the entire shelf. I don't remember falling asleep. Only waking, if waking is what you can call it, with my heart slamming in my chest and the taste of metal thick on my tongue. The lamp was still out, the heater a cold corpse in the corner. Frost laced my breath into ribbons. My hands ached from the cold, but that wasn't what dragged me from unconsciousness. It was the sound, not the heartbeat, not the scraping. A chorus, whispers, layered and endless, drifting up through the floorboards. 1,000 voices speaking over each other, too soft to separate, but rising in a tide that seemed to press directly against my skull. When I sat upright, ears straining, the whispers resolved into words. Adrian, come, down. I staggered to my feet, swaying from dizziness. The shack walls seemed thinner, bulging inward as if the ice itself was pressing against them. My skin prickled with the sense of being observed, not by one presence, but by many. I grabbed my parka and boots with numb fingers. Staying inside felt like suicide. Whatever I'd woken with that blast, it wasn't contained. It was spreading. The seismic graph still screamed across the desk, jagged peaks in chaotic rhythm. The whole shelf was alive now, pulsing like a single body. Outside, the night blazed green. The aurora tore across the sky in violent sheets, flooding the snow with spectral light. The wind was absent, but the air vibrated with resonance, a low hum that made my bones ache. The crater where the borehole had been was half buried by drift. Steam still rose from it in lazy curls. But the fissures, they had grown. I turned a full circle and saw them spiderwebbing outward in every direction, lines splitting the horizon like veins. A thought gripped me. It's not in one place anymore. It's under everything. The rational part of me whispered escape. My snowmobile was still parked near the supply shed. With enough fuel I could make a run south toward the coast, maybe reach one of the larger stations. It would mean days alone in the open, exposed, but at least it would be away from this cursed ground. But as soon as I took a step toward the shed, the snow beneath my boots moved. Not collapsed, not cracked, moved. It rose in a shallow swell, as if something enormous was rolling beneath the crust. My stomach flipped. I stumbled back, watching in disbelief as the swell slid across the plain, circling the shack in a slow orbit before vanishing into the distance. I wasn't alone anymore, and I wasn't free to leave. I bolted back inside, slammed the door, dropped the bar across it as if that flimsy gesture mattered. My breath came ragged, my fingers shaking uncontrollably. I tried the radio again, desperate, twisting dials until the speakers howled with static. And then, through the white noise, I heard it. Not my name. Not whispers. Laughter. Faint, distorted, but unmistakable. Dozens of voices laughing together, warped by the static into a jagged chorus. It rose and fell like a tide, then cut off in an instant. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. My vision swam, my thoughts unraveled. The scientist in me begged for structure, for something I could measure. But what instrument measures madness? The recorder. My hands found it in my pocket, cold metal grounding me. I pressed the button, speaking into it with a voice that hardly sounded like mine. Day 24, attempted to seal borehole failed. Subject appears to be larger than estimated. Seismic resonance indicates movement beneath entire shelf. Possible biological network spanning kilometers. Communication continues. Vocal, telepathic, both. It knows my name. It wants me to. I trailed off, throat tightening. The whispers had returned, louder now, filling the shack like a swarm of insects. To come down. The words left my mouth unbidden, echoing theirs. My knees buckled. I slammed the recorder shut as if cutting myself off could cut them off. The floor lurched beneath me, throwing me against the wall. The shack groaned, bolts straining, metal shrieking. Something was moving directly below, pressing upward. A bulge rose through the floorboards, wood cracking. I stumbled back, terror clamping icy fingers around my spine. A shape pushed through the gap. Not a hand, not a claw. Something like a tendril, pale and translucent, threaded with pulsing veins. It writhed against the floor, questing blindly, leaving trails of frost where it touched. My scream froze in my throat. I grabbed the nearest weapon I had, an ice axe propped against the wall, and swung. The blade bit into the tendril with a sickening crunch. For a moment, resistance held. Then the thing withdrew, sliding back through the splintered wood, vanishing below. Silence fell. The whispers cut off mid-breath. I stood panting, axe trembling in my hands, heart slamming so hard I thought it might burst. The cracked floor smoked faintly. The recorder still blinked red where it had fallen, capturing every ragged breath. I should leave. I knew it. Whatever lived beneath me, I couldn't fight it with axes and charges. But the thought of fleeing across that endless plain while the ground itself writhed under me, it felt like a different kind of death. So I stayed. Sat at the desk, axe laid across my knees, eyes fixed on the splintered boards, waiting for the next sign, because it wasn't finished, and neither was I. By dawn, the decision was made for me. The shack walls bowed inward, bolts whining under strain, frost creeping so thick across the ceiling that flakes drifted down like ash. I knew if I stayed, the thing would come again through the floor, or worse, through me. So I packed. The essentials, emergency rations, a thermal blanket, my recorder, the ice axe. I loaded the snowmobile with fuel canisters and lashed down a survival sled. My hands worked without thought, muscle memory drilled from training. The scientist in me wanted to stay, to measure, to document, but the man in me wanted to live. The plain stretched endless under a bruised sky. I kick-started the snowmobile, the engine coughing before roaring to life. The vibration felt grounding, almost human, against the vast silence. I swung into the saddle, gunned the throttle, and tore away from the shack. The outpost shrank quickly behind me, a metal speck vanishing into white. Relief bloomed in my chest for the first time in days. Forward, south, toward the coast, but the ground disagreed. 10 minutes out, I felt it. a tremor under the treads, subtle at first, then undeniable. The snowmobile rattled as fissures opened on either side, black slits yawning like mouths. I swerved hard, skimming the edge of one, heart hammering. The horizon shifted, not the aurora, not my vision, the land itself. Swells rose in the snow, rolling in parallel waves like the back of something swimming beneath. They converged toward me, closing distance with terrible grace. I gunned the throttle, the machine whining, the treads spit snow in a frantic spray. But the swells moved faster, circling, hurting. And then came the voice, carried not in my skull this time, but in the air itself. Adrian, you cannot leave. The sound reverberated across the ice, rolling in every direction at once. My chest vibrated with it, lungs clenching. I shouted wordless defiance and pushed the throttle until the snowmobile screamed. For a moment, speed carried me clear. The swells faltered, the fissures closing. My heart leapt until I glanced back. The shack was gone. I should have seen it, a dark blot on the white horizon, but behind me the plain stretched empty, featureless. No building, no crater, no sign of where I'd come from. My hands shook on the handlebars. Either I'd gone farther than I thought, or the land itself was changing around me. The hum began again, low and steady, threading through the engine's roar. My vision blurred at the edges. Shapes moved in the periphery, dark figures gliding across the snow, too tall, too thin. I blinked. They vanished. Blinked again. They returned, pacing me on both sides like hunters flanking prey. I pulled the axe from its holster and raised it one-handed, my other gripping the throttle. The figures didn't close in. They only watched, gliding soundless, their forms bending in and out of the aurora's green glow. The snowmobile bucked, a fissure cracked open ahead, yawning wide. I wrenched the handlebars, skidding hard, sled whipping behind me. The machine slammed down, treads biting, just shy of collapse. My chest jolted, lungs burning with cold air. Then silence. The figures were gone. The tremors ceased. For a moment I hoped I'd outrun it, but then the aurora flared brighter than I'd ever seen. The sky tore in curtains of green and violet, so luminous the snow glowed emerald. And in that light, the ground itself rose. A shape broke the crust ahead of me, vast, pale, a translucent wall of flesh threaded with pulsing veins, rising like a glacier, blotting out the horizon. My snowmobile skidded sideways, nearly toppling as I fought the throttle. The shape shifted, folding inward, forming what looked sickeningly like a face pressed against the ice from below. Its features stretched wrong, eyes too far apart, mouth too wide, the expression a grotesque parody of human recognition. And it spoke. Adrian, you are ours. The sound wasn't a voice. It was the land, the sky, my blood. It rattled the snowmobile apart, bolts clattering loose, engines screaming. I threw myself off just as the machine veered into a fissure, swallowed whole. I landed hard, rolling, snow burning my cheeks. The sled skidded free, spilling gear across the drift. I scrambled, hands clawing for the recorder, the axe, anything. The fissure yawned wider, heat gusted from it, carrying a stench like iron and rot. Shadows writhed within, too many limbs, too many eyes. The whispers returned, a chorus rising until it felt like my skull would burst. I clutched the recorder, pressed the button with shaking fingers. Day, I don't know. Location compromised. Entire shelf is alive. It's aware. It's hunting me. My voice cracked. This is not geological. This is not microbial. This is... The ground buckled. I choked on the words. Something else. I staggered to my feet, gear forgotten, sled abandoned. My only thought was to run. Forward, anywhere, away from the fissure. But as I sprinted across the snow, lungs tearing in the cold, I realized the truth. There was no away. The present stretched in every direction, its veins the fissures, its breath the mist, its eyes the aurora above. The entire ice shelf wasn't just home to it. The ice shelf was it, and I was running across its skin. The wind never came. The air remained unnaturally still, yet the ground beneath me rippled and swelled with the pulse of something alive. Each step I took across the ice felt like running on the back of a titanic creature. My lungs burned with cold and exertion. My mind screamed, run, run, run. But run where? The horizon was an unbroken wall of white. Fissures spiderwebbed in every direction. The aurora above pulsed, streaking the sky with impossible intensity, green and violet light, painting every surface with shadows that moved independently as if mocking me. I paused, bent over, gasping, trying to rationalize. Scientist, glaciologist, rational, measure, record, survive. My recorder still clutched in one hand, I tried to focus on the data, but nothing could ground me. Not the graphs, not the notes. The ice was alive, intelligent, and aware of me. The whispers returned, layered, overlapping, in 1,000 tones, not just voices, but a chorus vibrating in my bones. Adrian, come with us forever. I stumbled backward, falling onto my hands. The ice beneath my palms shifted, veins of frost lifting like fingers. I tried to rise, tried to run again, but every step brought resistance. The fissures widened, closing behind me, forcing me forward toward something. Then I saw it. A wall of translucent flesh emerged ahead, rising like a glacier. Veins pulsed in patterns I could not comprehend, winding and branching across the surface like rivers of light. The aurora seemed to bow around it, following its contours. My stomach turned as I realized it wasn't just ahead. It surrounded me. The fissures had closed into tunnels beneath the ice, guiding me toward this entity. Tendrils of frozen light stretched up from the snow, brushing against my limbs, cold and wet, probing. I screamed, swinging the ice axe, but it passed through as if through air, leaving only a tremor in the snow. The whispers were now inside me, coiling in my skull. I could hear my own thoughts layered with theirs. I knew the truth. The ice shelf had never been inert. It had been waiting, watching, learning. And I had walked onto its skin like an insect unaware of the predator beneath. I had a choice: surrender. Attempt to flee further into the endless expanse, knowing the creature could extend itself faster than I could run, or confront it directly, using the one tool left: knowledge. My brain grasped at the fragments of rationality that remained: the borehole, the sample cores, the filaments moving in the microscope. I remembered their shimmer, their twitching. They weren't just alive, they were adaptable, intelligent. If I could destroy the shallow access points, perhaps I could buy time. Perhaps. But time was a luxury I did not have. A tendril pressed against my leg. Cold seeped into my bones. Another brushed my face, and I staggered, screaming, trying to tear it away. The whispers twisted into coherent phrases now. Do not resist. Join us. I ran blindly toward what I hoped was the coast, toward some remnant of civilization. Each step carried me further, but the ice shifted beneath me, guiding, corralling, herding me like prey. The aurora flared, the ice groaned, and the whispers swelled. My body ached. My vision blurred. Hours, or maybe minutes, I could not tell, passed. The snowmobile, abandoned behind me, lay half-buried in a fissure. I stumbled past it without recognition. The creature's tendrils were everywhere now, lifting snow, shifting ice, pressing toward me in waves. I fell onto my hands and knees, sobbing, dragging myself across the plain. Then, as sudden as it began, the pressure eased. The tendrils retreated into the fissures. The whispers faded. The aurora dimmed to a gentle glow. The snow lay smooth, silent, still. I lay there trembling, staring at the endless horizon. I had survived. Somehow I had survived, but the ice shelf, it was still alive, watching, waiting, and I knew with a cold certainty that it would not forget me. I gathered what strength remained, crawling toward a distant ridge where I hoped my presence might go unnoticed. Behind me, the fissures healed as if they had never been. The snowmobile and supplies were gone. The shack, the borehole, the research outpost, erased. I did not stop. I cannot stop. I write this in the recorder I carry now, pressed into the snow beside me, hoping someone, anyone, might find it. Whatever I encountered beneath the ice is ancient, intelligent, and patient. I cannot say it is malevolent, only aware, and it is vast, far beyond the limits of comprehension. I do not know what will happen next. All I know is this: I survived. For now. But I will not sleep. And I will not stop listening, because somewhere beneath the endless ice shelf, it waits, and one day, it will call again. The name's Captain Elias Novak, 38 years old, Czech Special Forces. My line of work has carved the softness out of me, left me all hard edges and instinct. I was trained to follow orders, to fight in places most men wouldn't even survive walking into. But the mission that brought me here, this one, felt wrong from the start. We were flown into the Siberian tundra in a rickety cargo plane that rattled against the wind like loose bones in a box. Outside, the white void stretched endless, broken only by the black ribs of dead trees poking from the permafrost. The temperature knifed through every seam of my gear. Even inside the thick jacket, the cold seeped into me, lodged in my chest, turned each breath into shards of glass. Our objective was simple, or at least that's how command put it. A Soviet-era research station, shuttered since the late 1970s, had gone dark again. Someone had triggered the old emergency beacon last week. Moscow swore the place was abandoned decades ago. Washington said otherwise. My unit was tasked with recon, confirmation, and extraction of any surviving personnel, if there were any. The men around me were cut from the same cloth. Ortega, the American, loud-mouthed, built like a bear, always cracking jokes to keep the silence from swallowing him. Ulyanov, Russian-born, cold as the land we were flying over, sharp-eyed and sharp-tongued. And me, sitting with my rifle across my knees, silent. Observing, wondering why the air already smelled wrong, even inside the fuselage, like iron and rot carried on the wind. The station revealed itself at dusk, a cluster of squat, rusting modules chained together by ice-caked corridors, rising out of the snow like half-buried coffins. The windows were dark, antennas twisted skyward, snapped by storms decades past. I felt it immediately, that weight pressing against my sternum, the wordless warning that soldiers either listen to or die ignoring. Something was waiting here. We landed a click out and trudged across the ice, boots crunching in rhythm. The wind was dead still, yet I could swear I heard a low vibration beneath us, as though the tundra itself was humming. When we reached the outer fence, half collapsed, barbed wire buried in frost, I noticed the snowdrifts. They weren't natural. They'd been disturbed recently, piled in strange arcs like something had pushed up from below. Inside the compound, the air thickened. I smelled oil, frozen blood, and a faint sweetness, like meat gone bad. Ortega muttered a curse. Ulyanov tightened his grip on the rifle, and I stayed quiet because I'd learned long ago that silence was the only honest reaction to fear. We pushed open the main hatch. Rust screamed on its hinges, echoing down empty metal corridors. My flashlight cut through dust and frost, revealing walls lined with peeling Cyrillic posters, diagrams of cellular structures, warnings about containment. I caught one word clearly, stenciled in black: obrazets. Specimen. That was when we found the first body. It was slumped against the corridor wall, half buried in frost. A researcher, white coat stiff with ice. His face was frozen in mid-scream, mouth wide, eyes shattered glass. Only his chest was hollowed out as if something had eaten him from the inside. Ortega gagged. Ulyanov whispered something in Russian, too low for me to catch. I just stared at the dark hole where a man's heart should have been, and I knew then, this wasn't any rescue mission. I should have turned back. We all should have. But soldiers don't turn back. We swept the first corridor in silence. The crunch of our boots on ice and the hiss of our breaths in the respirators echoed too loud, like intruders in a church. The station was a tomb, and we were trespassers. My flashlight beam trembled slightly in my grip, not from weakness, but from the cold working into my bones. I told myself that. Always tell yourself it's the cold, not fear. Ortega muttered behind me, "Jesus Christ, man, what the hell eats a man like that?" His voice cracked the silence and died fast, like sound itself was afraid to linger here. "Quiet," I snapped. My voice came out too sharp, but I didn't regret it. Discipline kept men alive. Fear spread like fire if you let it. We moved deeper. The station layout was a series of prefabricated modules connected by long, narrow corridors. Every junction smelled stronger, metal, oil, and that sweetness underneath, a scent I knew from battlefields when corpses lay out too long. But it was wrong here. It was too fresh. Ulyanov took point at the next hatch, listening before he opened it. He was good, calm, precise. He glanced at me, raised his eyebrows in question. I nodded. The hatch swung open, releasing a puff of air that carried that same sweetness, heavier now. It coated my tongue. I swallowed bile. Inside was a lab, or what was left of it. Tables overturned, glassware shattered and embedded in the frost. A microscope lay cracked in half on the floor. Across the far wall, chalkboards covered in formulas and diagrams half erased by time and condensation. But one stood out, still fresh, still legible. It was a drawing of something circular. No, not circular, spiraling. A coil twisting tighter and tighter inward, arrows pointing to the core. Beside it, Cyrillic words scrawled in chalk. It learns. The hairs on my neck rose. Ulyanov stepped forward, brushing frost off the chalkboard with his glove. His breath fogged the air. They were studying something alive, he said. His voice was low, almost reverent. And it adapted. Don't romanticize it, I muttered. Whatever it was, it's loose. That was when Ortega's beam of light froze on the far corner. Cap, tell me I'm seeing what I'm seeing. I turned my flashlight and nearly dropped it. There was a trail, a smear across the floor, dark and crusted, frozen into the ice. It started near the far wall and dragged out into the corridor. Not footprints, not blood splatter. A dragging trail wide as a man's torso with streaks like fingers clawing against the ground. It led deeper into the station. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The silence pressed down, thicker than the air itself. My heart was a drum in my chest. And then, faint, so faint I thought I imagined it, came a sound, a voice. Help, please. Ortega's face went white. No, man, that's quiet, I hissed, but I'd heard it too. A man's voice, muffled, broken, but clear. It echoed through the corridors, carried on stale air. It sounded human. It sounded close. But we'd seen the frozen body. We'd seen what was left of him still. Protocol was protocol. We followed. We advanced down the corridor, weapons raised. The trail dragged beneath our boots, guiding us forward. The voice came again, clearer now, echoing off the walls. Please, help me. I'm still alive. It was coming from the next hatch. I swallowed hard, gripped the rifle tighter. My gloves squeaked against the stock. I gave hand signals. Ortega on left, Ulyanov on right. Cover arcs. I moved to the hatch, heart pounding. I pressed my ear to the cold metal. Silence, then scratch. Scratch like fingernails against steel. I pulled the latch. The hatch creaked open. The smell hit first. Sweet, wet, suffocating, rot hidden under ice. My stomach lurched. Inside, the room was dark, only our flashlights cutting through. And in the center, something hunched. At first, I thought it was a man on his knees. Back turned to us, body trembling. His coat was shredded, skin pale, hair plastered with frost. His voice trembled. Help me. Ortega lowered his weapon just slightly. Shit, he's alive. No, I said. My voice cracked, raw in my throat. Because I saw it, the shoulders. They rose and fell in jerks, too fast, like the rhythm of a beast pretending to breathe. The back bent wrong, and then slowly the head turned. Not all the way. Not like a man. It rolled too far, vertebrae cracking wetly until a face looked back at us, upside down. Its eyes were gone. The sockets were filled with black, glistening tissue, bat pulsing faintly like something alive beneath, and its mouth moved. Help me, I fired first. My rifle roared, echoing off the walls. The thing convulsed, flailed, screamed, not with pain, but with mimicry. Our own gunfire screams echoed back at us in its voice. Bullets tore through flesh, but instead of blood, a spray of black fluid hit the walls, sizzling on contact with frost. It collapsed, twitching. But even as it lay there, the voice didn't stop. It echoed around us, shifting from one tone to another. Ortega's voice, then Ulyanov's, then my own. Help me. Cap, Elias, help me. We backed out of the room, weapons shaking. The thing was still twitching when the hatch slammed shut. Silence. We stood in the corridor, breathing like hunted animals. Ortega was pale, muttering under his breath. Ulyanov's jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth would crack. I wiped my mouth with the back of my glove. The taste of metal lingered. My chest felt tight, but my training forced the words out steady. That wasn't human, I said. Not anymore. We're not here for survivors. We're here to contain. Even as I said it, the walls around us seemed to hum. Low, deep, like something alive pressed its body against the steel. And the voice came again, this time from deeper inside the station. My voice. Elias, come find me. The sound of my own voice echoing down that steel corridor shook me harder than gunfire ever had. It wasn't just the words, it was the cadence, the rhythm. Perfectly mine, down to the gravel edge carved by cigarettes and sandstorms in Afghanistan. I'd spent years learning to command men with that voice, and now it was coming back at me like a mockery. Ortega whispered, "Nope, no way. We're getting the hell out, Cap. I didn't sign up for—" "You signed up to follow orders," I cut in, but my voice felt like cracked ice, brittle. "We don't run blind into the storm. We find the source, shut it down, then exfil." Even I didn't believe the steel in my tone. My gut screamed to leave, to abandon the mission, but instinct battled training. A soldier without discipline was just another corpse waiting to happen. We pressed forward, rifles up, beams of light trembling against walls etched with frost patterns that didn't look random anymore. They curved, spiraled, as if the ice itself had been forced into shapes, like the diagram on the chalkboard. The hum grew louder the deeper we went. Not in our ears, under our skin. A vibration in the bones, rattling the teeth. Every step made my legs feel heavier, like the air thickened, slowed us down. The corridor opened into a larger chamber. This must have been the main lab. Our lights revealed broken equipment, glass tanks spiderwebbed with cracks. Something had been grown here, contained, observed. A few tanks still held frozen remnants, half-formed masses suspended in cloudy fluid, shapes almost human, almost animal, but wrong in every way. Ortega swore. Ulyanov whispered, "Experimenti." His voice had a strange reverence, but also fear. At the far end of the lab stood a reinforced door, thicker than the others, paint blistered from inside. The dragging trail led right to it, and then stopped. We froze in formation. The hum was louder here, oppressive. My throat tightened, ears ringing. Ortega shifted, sweat freezing on his brow. "Cap, I don't like this." Neither did I. The door looked like it had been meant to keep something in, not out. Warnings stenciled in faded red Cyrillic screamed, "Не открывать," do not open. And then came the sound, a knock. 3 slow raps against steel, hollow, patient. Ortega raised his rifle at the door. "Hell no, no way, we're leaving." But the knock came again, and this time the voice followed, soft, weak, like someone half drowned. "Elias, it's me. Open the door." It was Jensen's voice. Jensen had been our medic. He'd bled out in Kandahar 5 years ago. I'd held pressure on the wound myself until his body went slack. I'd buried him. I remembered the dirt under my nails from digging his grave. Now his voice whispered through the door like he was standing right there. My stomach turned to stone. My grip tightened on the rifle. For a moment, I almost stepped forward. Almost. Ulyanov's hand shot out, gripping my arm. His eyes, icy blue, wide with something that looked like terror, locked on mine. He shook his head, hard. The voice tried again, weaker this time. "It's cold, Eli, so cold. Open up." And then it shifted. Not Jensen's voice anymore. Mine. "Captain Elias Novak, you can't leave me here." The reinforced door shuddered once like something massive pressed against it. The steel bent outward, groaned. Frost rained down from the frame. "Back!" I barked. We scattered, rifles aimed. Ortega swore and made the sign of the cross. Ulyanov's jaw clenched tight. My own heart slammed so hard it felt like my ribs would crack. The door bent again, a bulge swelling outward, a screech of metal. Then, slowly, the pressure eased. The steel snapped back into place with a hollow boom that echoed through the lab. The humming stopped. Silence pressed down like a weight. For a long moment, no one moved. Finally, Ortega whispered, "Cap, what the hell are we fighting?" I swallowed, throat dry. The answer came unbidden. Something that learns. As if on cue, the radios on our vests crackled to life. Static hissed, then cleared. Ortega, Ulyanov, Novak. Our names, whispered in perfect mimicry of command's voice. Calm, firm. Status report. We stared at one another. None of us touched the radios. The voice repeated louder. Status report. Then it laughed. My laugh. I slammed the radio off. The sound still echoed in the room even after the static died. That was the moment we all knew the truth. This wasn't about survivors. It wasn't even about a mission. We weren't here to save anyone. We were bait. The hum started again, deeper now, vibrating through the floor. And from the corridor behind us, faint but unmistakable, footsteps, not one set, many, boots on steel. Ortega swung his rifle toward the sound. "There's no one else here," he whispered, but the footsteps grew louder, closer, perfectly in sync with our own formation, as if mocking us. I raised my rifle, voice a rasp in the dark. "Contact!" The footsteps drew closer, heavy, measured, echoing down the frost-rimmed corridor behind us. Ortega's rifle barrel shook as he aimed, his breath fogging the air in ragged bursts. Ulyanov pressed his back against the wall, eyes narrowing, fingers steady on the trigger. I could feel my own pulse in my teeth. The boots kept coming, closer, louder, and then we saw them. 3 figures emerged from the corridor, silhouettes forming against our flashlights, human shapes in tattered Soviet uniforms, faces shadowed by frost and grime. Their movements were stiff, like puppets forced to remember how to walk. Ortega almost broke. "Jesus, holy Jesus, they're alive?" "No," I said. The word tore from my throat like stone, because as the figures drew closer, their faces came into the light. The first man's skin was translucent, veins black with something that pulsed. His eyes were glassy, sockets rimmed with frostbite, yet his mouth worked soundlessly, opening and closing. The second shuffled with a broken leg that never healed, bone jutting, flesh twisted, yet he moved as if pain was only a memory. The third wore a face I recognized. It was Jensen, the medic, the one I'd buried under Afghan dust 5 years ago. His lips stretched into a grotesque parody of a smile, black fluid frozen on his chin. And when he spoke, the voice was perfect. "Eli." The rifle slipped in my hands for half a second before instinct snapped it back into position. Training over memory. Always training. "Engage," I barked. My voice cracked like a whip in the frozen air. Ortega fired first, the chamber thunderous, muzzle flash sparking light against steel. The round hit the first figure in the chest, tearing it open in a spray of black sludge. It staggered, shrieking in a voice not its own, then kept walking. Ulyanov's shots were precise, surgical, 2 to the head of the second year. The skull exploded in shards of ice and bone, black fluid hissing against the floor. The body collapsed, twitching like a cut wire. I put a burst into Jensen's chest. My heart clenched with every pull of the trigger, but the rounds shredded through him. The body bent backward unnaturally, then snapped upright again. His mouth opened wider than humanly possible, jaw unhinging with a wet crack. From the void inside came not his voice, but mine. "Captain Elias Novak, stop resisting." I fired until the rifle clicked empty. The thing twitched, staggered, but it didn't fall. Ortega shouted, "It won't die." His panic bled through the roar of gunfire. He slammed a fresh mag, fired again. The first figure lunged, its hands stretched into claws, nails tearing through Ortega's jacket as it slammed into him. He screamed, went down under the weight. Black saliva dripped from its mouth onto his face. "Cover!" I roared, lunging forward. The butt of my rifle smashed into its skull, once, twice, until the head caved inward with a wet crunch. Black fluid sprayed across my visor, sizzling where it landed. Ortega kicked the corpse off, scrambling upright, chest heaving. His eyes were wild, pupils blown wide with terror. Ulyanov grabbed my shoulder, pointed past me. "Door!" The reinforced door at the end of the lab, the one that had bent outward, was trembling again. Not from knocking this time, from pounding. Massive, rhythmic, each slam shaking the floor beneath us. Frost rained from the ceiling. The steel warped with every impact, groaning. "Move," I ordered. We bolted back toward the corridor we came from, feet pounding on the icy floor. Behind us, the last figure, the one that wore Jensen's face, let out a sound that wasn't a voice. It was a chorus. 1,000 voices screaming at once, each one of them ours. Ortega's laughter, Ulyanov's curses. My own barked orders, layered together until the walls shook with it. We sprinted through the corridor, flashlights jerking. The walls seemed closer now, pulsing with frost patterns that spiraled tighter, as if drawing us into a vortex. My lungs burned, throat raw from the cold and the stench. Every shadow looked alive. Ortega stumbled, nearly fell, but Ulyanov grabbed his vest, yanking him forward. Keep running, he snarled. His Russian accent was thick now, stripped bare by panic. We rounded a corner, burst into another chamber, a storage bay. Empty crates stacked like coffins, tarps frozen stiff. For a heartbeat, silence. Only our breathing, ragged, desperate. Then from the dark corners of the room came whispers. Our own voices, repeating every word we just said. Ortega's panic cries, Ulyanov's curses, my commands, whispered back to us, layered over and over until the sound filled every inch of space. Ortega lost it. He ripped off his helmet, flung it aside, screaming at the shadows. Shut up! Shut up! Get out of my head! Ortega, I barked, slamming a hand on his chest. His eyes were wild, veins bulging in his temples. He was breaking, and if he broke, we'd all die here. Listen to me. I snarled, gripping his vest tight. Focus. You hear me? You're a soldier. Act like it. His breath slowed, just slightly. Enough. He nodded once, jerky. The whispers stopped. For one moment, silence. Then the far wall of the storage bay buckled outward. A ripple moved across the steel, like something massive pressed against it. The crates toppled, tarps sliding across the floor. Ulyanov raised his rifle, muttering in Russian, a prayer or a curse. I couldn't tell. The wall split open with a shriek of tearing metal. From the fissure slid something black and glistening, formless at first, then stretching upward, taller than a man. Its surface shifted like liquid, sprouting limbs that melted back in, mouths opening and closing across its body, each one mouthing our names. Elias. Ortega. Ulyanov. I froze. My body screamed to fire, but training held me still for half a second, because this wasn't just a creature. It was intelligent. It was learning. Every bullet we fired, every word we spoke, every fear we revealed, it absorbed, twisted, used against us. It leaned closer, the mouths stretching wider. The whispers turned into one voice, my voice, booming through the chamber. You will stay here. That was when I fired the grenade launcher. The blast rocked the chamber, fire lighting the black mass. It screamed, not in pain, but in mimicry, in the sound of our own screams thrown back at us. The shockwave knocked us off our feet, crates exploding into splinters. When the smoke cleared, the thing was gone. Only scorch marks and sizzling black residue remained, hissing on the floor. But the hum in the walls was louder now. All around us. It hadn't died. It had split. The scorch marks still smoked when Ortega staggered to his feet, coughing through the acrid haze. It's dead, he wheezed, wiping soot from his visor. Tell me it's dead. But even as he said it, the hum rose around us, vibrating through the deck plates, rattling the metal ribs of the bay. I knew better. You don't survive long in this line of work by clinging to hope. You survive by accepting the truth, however ugly it is. It's not dead, I said flatly. My voice sounded hollow in my own ears, stripped of everything but certainty. Ulyanov's eyes darted to the spreading black residue sizzling on the floor. The puddles trembled, quivered, and then split apart like living tar, retreating in opposite directions, one toward the corridor we'd come through, the other seeping into a vent. Ortega swore, stepping back. It's splitting. Jesus, Cap, it's in the walls now. The hum deepened, becoming almost rhythmic. A pulse. It was in the air, the steel, the frost, everywhere at once. My teeth buzzed. My rifle felt heavier in my hands. This whole place is compromised, I muttered. The lights flickered. Once, twice, then failed, plunging us into blackness. Our flashlights stuttered, beams weak and unreliable, as if the very current was being bled dry by the thing crawling through the station. I switched mine back on and swept the room. The scorch marks were gone, not faded. Gone. The floor was clean steel again, as if nothing had ever burned there. Only the smell lingered, thick and chemical, crawling into my throat like smoke from a funeral pyre. Ortega whispered, "It's erasing itself." Ulyanov's jaw clenched. It doesn't want us to know how to kill it. The truth sank cold into my gut. This wasn't just a predator. It was a strategist. I forced air into my lungs, steadying myself. We regroup. We find a choke point. We make a stand. But even as I said it, the corridor ahead groaned. Frost split in spirals across the walls, forming patterns like veins. From somewhere deep in the station came a sound like breathing, slow, wet, cavernous, and then the voices started again. This time it wasn't just whispers, it was shouting. Orders barked in command's tone, arguments, laughter, screams. Every sound we'd made since entering the station was thrown back at us at once, a cacophony of ourselves filling the air. Ortega covered his ears, screaming wordlessly. Ulyanov's nostrils flared as he gritted his teeth, resisting. I stood frozen, staring into the corridor, because through the chaos, one voice cut clear. My mother's. Eli, come home. My stomach flipped. She'd been dead 15 years. I could still remember her hand on my shoulder before I shipped out, the warmth, the tremor in her voice when she told me to come back safe. I hadn't heard that voice since she went into the ground, and now it was here, in this frozen tomb. The corridor lights flickered back to life for a split second, and in that heartbeat I saw her silhouette at the far end. Fragile, familiar, arms outstretched. Then darkness again. Cap! Ortega's hand slammed my arm. Don't go near it. His voice was raw with terror. He was right. I forced myself to blink, break the spell. The silhouette was gone. Only blackness waited at the end of the corridor. My voice cracked, but I forced the words out. It's not her. It's never her. Don't listen. Don't look. We pushed on, sticking tight to formation. The hum grew louder the deeper we went, like we were moving closer to a heartbeat buried in the bones of the station. The corridors bled frost patterns curling into spirals, tighter and tighter, pulling us inward. When we reached the central hub, the stench hit full force. Sweet rot, oil, and something else. Ozone, like after a lightning strike. The walls were slick with condensation. The floor vibrated faintly, as though something massive shifted below us. In the middle of the hub stood a hatch leading down. A heavy, circular steel plate with a wheel lock. The dragging trail we'd been following since the first body led straight to it. Ortega shook his head violently. Nope, we're not going down there. Ulyanov's eyes burned cold. That is where it came from. I stared at the hatch, throat tight. The hum radiated from beneath it, pulsing like a living thing. My instincts screamed at me to avoid it, to leave this place behind. But the soldier in me, the man forged by orders and duty, knew there was no leaving until we faced what was down there. It's the source, I said quietly. Whatever they found, whatever they woke up, it's still below. The hatch groaned suddenly, metal twisting under invisible hands. The wheel lock spun a quarter turn by itself before clanging to a halt. A hiss of warm air escaped the seam, washing over us. It smelled like rust, decay, and salt water. We backed away instinctively. Then, faintly, from beneath the hatch came a sound. A chorus of voices, ours, theirs, everyone's, fused together into one word. Open. The wheel lock twitched again. My blood turned to ice. We can't stay here, Ortega whispered, his panic cracking into sobs. Cap, I'm begging you. We'll die if we stay here. He wasn't wrong, but there was nowhere to go. Behind us, the corridors breathed with frost, shadows twitching in the corners of our vision. Ahead of us, the hatch pulsed, every breath of air from below, tainted with something older than language. I thought of all the missions before, ambushes in Afghan valleys, traps in Balkan ruins, firefights in jungles where the air itself wanted you dead. Every time, there had been an enemy I could see, measure, predict. This wasn't that. This was a war against the unseen, and I was already losing. The wheel spun again. Half a turn. The hatch shuddered, metal groaning as if it were alive. I raised my rifle, though I knew how useless it was. If it opens, we hold the line. Ortega's voice cracked. Hold it with what? Bullets don't kill it. Ulyanov chambered around with steady hands, though his eyes betrayed the tremor in his soul. We make it bleed enough, maybe it remembers how to die. The wheel spun again. 3/4 now. The hatch was opening, and from below came a sound that drowned every instinct, every memory, every scrap of courage I had left. A heartbeat. Deep. Slow. Older than the earth above it, and it was waking up. The wheel lock spun on its own, the sound of grinding metal echoing through the hub like a scream. Ortega fired at it in desperation. Short, wild bursts that ricocheted off the steel, sparks raining down. Futile. The hatch didn't even flinch. With a final groan, the lock snapped free. The hatch yawned open. Warm air surged upward, damp and heavy, smelling of brine and blood. My stomach lurched. The stench was so thick I could taste it. My flashlight beam cut down into the black pit below, but the light seemed swallowed whole, vanishing into nothing after a few meters. And then it moved. Not a figure, not a body, a ripple. Like the earth itself shifted beneath the station. Something vast stirred in that abyss, unseen yet undeniable. The heartbeat we'd felt through the walls thudded louder now, shaking frost loose from the ceiling. Ortega whispered a prayer in Spanish, his rifle trembling. Ulyanov crouched low, weapon steady, eyes fixed on the hatch. My own pulse hammered in my skull, but I forced my breathing steady. Fear never won a fight. Fear only sharpened the blade. From the pit came voices. Not whispers this time, shouts. A chorus of hundreds, maybe thousands, layered over one another. Some in Russian, some in English, some in tongues I didn't know, but threaded through them all were voices I recognized. Jensen, command, my mother, and then me. Elias Novak, come down. The floor beneath us shuddered. Frost cracked, spiraled outward in fractal veins. The hatch gaped wider as if something below was breathing it open. And then we saw it. At first, just a hand, or what looked like one. 5 long appendages stretching upward, black and glistening, bending at angles that hurt to watch. It gripped the edge of the hatch, nails sinking into steel as though it were paper. Another hand followed. Then the top of a head, faceless and shifting, features rippling like liquid. It hauled itself upward, unfolding taller and taller until it blotted out the ceiling lights. Its surface writhed with mouths and eyes opening and closing at random, each one blinking or screaming in a voice stolen from us. "Cap!" Ortega shouted, panic snapping his voice high. Oh God, it's coming up! Fire! I barked. All 3 of us opened up. Muzzle flashes lit the chamber in strobe bursts, bullets tearing into the black mass. It shrieked, not in pain, but in mimicry. Every shot echoed back at us, every sound replayed in our own voices. Black ichor sprayed, hissing on contact with steel, but the thing only climbed higher. It reached a full height of 3 meters, looming above us, mouths stretched wide in soundless screams. One of the mouths snapped open, and from it came Jensen's voice again. "Help me, Eli." I pulled the trigger until the rifle clicked dry. My hands shook as I reloaded, but the thing didn't slow. Its arms lashed out. One slammed a crate into splinters, another swiped at Ortega. He dodged barely, the blow denting the wall where his skull would have been. Ulyanov launched a frag. The blast tore a chunk out of the thing's torso, spraying black fluid across the walls. It staggered, but then the wound closed, knitting back together in seconds. "It heals," Ulyanov snarled. Ortega screamed, "We can't fight this! We can't!" His voice cut off in a choke as one of the appendages shot forward, wrapping around his waist. It lifted him into the air like a child's toy. He fired point blank into the limb, bullets shredding it, but the thing only laughed. Not Ortega's laugh. Mine. I lunged, pulling the combat knife from my vest, and slashed at the appendage. The blade cut deep, black fluid spraying hot and foul. The limb recoiled, dropping Ortega. He crashed to the floor, coughing blood but alive. The thing reeled back, dozens of eyes snapping open across its surface, all of them locking onto me. And then every mouth opened at once. My own voice boomed from them in unison. "You are mine." The sound hit like a physical force, rattling my skull. My vision blurred, blood trickled from my ears. Ortega writhed on the floor, clutching his head. Ulyanov stumbled, teeth clenched, blood on his lips. I forced myself upright. Fear was a poison, but rage was a weapon. "Not today," I spat. I raised the grenade launcher again, aimed straight into the center mass, fired. The explosion lit the chamber in hellfire. The creature shrieked in 1,000 stolen voices, staggering backward, flames chewing through its surface. I fired again, and again. Each blast tore it apart, chunks slamming into walls, sizzling, writhing. But even as it fell, the black fragments didn't die. They slithered across the floor, seeping into vents, vanishing into cracks. The hum in the walls grew louder, spreading, multiplying. The creature collapsed back into the hatch, dissolving into the pit below. The voices faded, replaced by that steady, earth-shaking heartbeat. Slower now, waiting. The hatch slammed shut. The wheel lock spun tight by itself. Silence. Ortega lay gasping, blood on his lips. Ulyanov reloaded mechanically, his face a mask of ice. I stood in the center of the hub, chest heaving, staring at the hatch. We hadn't won. We hadn't even heard it. All we'd done was wake it up, and it was still here, in the walls, in the vents, in the very air we breathed. I realized then the truth that curdled my stomach. This station wasn't abandoned. It wasn't forgotten. It was a prison, and someone had opened the door. The silence after the hatch sealed was worse than the chaos before. My ears still rang with the echo of my own voice screaming from 100 mouths, and in that ringing silence came the dreadful realization: the station wasn't just compromised. It was part of it now. Or maybe it always had been. The frost on the walls pulsed faintly, in time with the heartbeat below. The steel under my boots vibrated like living flesh. The smell of rot and ozone thickened until every breath felt like inhaling disease. Ortega coughed, blood flecking his lips. He was pale, trembling, but alive. His eyes darted around the hub as though shadows themselves were predators. "We need to get out, Cap. Now. I don't care how, we just can't stay in here." He wasn't wrong. Ulyanov, steady even as his hands reloaded with mechanical precision, said flatly, "Exfil route is gone. The way we came, already compromised." "We'll find another," I said. My voice was steadier than I felt. "This place has supply tunnels, emergency exits. They built redundancies into everything during the Cold War. We just have to reach one." The hum answered me, vibrating the air like a laugh. I ignored it, because the only other option was to break. We moved fast, rifles raised, flashlights sweeping. The corridors were different now. Not just frost spirals, but bulges in the walls, faintly translucent like veins pressed against skin. Black liquid pulsed through them, sluggish but alive. When Ortega's light passed over one, it twitched as if reacting to his gaze. "Mother of God," he whispered. The station was no longer just steel and concrete. It was becoming something else, something that breathed. We pressed on. The plan was simple: reach the northern module where the blueprints had marked an auxiliary supply tunnel, blast our way out if necessary, and reach the snowfields for extraction. Survival depended on speed. But the station had other plans. The first corridor forked unexpectedly, a passage we hadn't seen before yawning open to our right. The steel walls groaned as if shifting. Ortega froze, shaking his head. "That wasn't here. That wasn't. Cap, it's moving." The air from the new corridor reeked of salt water and rust, and from its depths came a whisper, soft, coaxing, perfectly human. "Eli." My throat closed. The voice was my mother's again, fragile and warm, like it had been in life. I forced myself to look away. "Eyes forward," I ordered. My voice came out harsher than intended, but harsh was better than weak. "Ignore it." We turned left instead, toward the mapped route. The corridor stretched longer than it should have, like the station itself was drawing it out. The hum deepened with each step, seeping into marrow. My legs felt heavy, lungs raw with every breath. Halfway through, the floor buckled. A fissure split down the steel, and from it bubbled black sludge that solidified into shapes. Figures, 3 of them forming slowly, like wax statues rising from tar. Their faces sharpened, features forming, and my stomach clenched when I recognized them. Us, Ortega, Ulyanov, me. 3 replicas stood in the corridor ahead, skin slick and dark, eyes black voids. Each one raised a rifle, our rifles. The mimicry was perfect. "Contact!" I roared, diving to the side. Gunfire ripped the corridor, sparks spraying. Ortega returned fire, screaming wordlessly, rounds punching holes in his double. Black ichor sprayed, sizzling on the walls. Ulyanov took his replica down with 3 precise shots to the head, but even as it fell, the corpse dissolved into sludge and began crawling back together. My double raised its weapon, voice cold and perfect. "Elias Novak, stand down." I fired without hesitation. Bullets shredded its chest, but it didn't fall. Instead, its mouth opened wide, and out came my own voice again, twisted into a mockery. "You can't leave. You are already part of us." It charged. I met it head on, slamming my shoulder into its chest. The thing was strong. Too strong, but rage and training carried me. I drove my combat knife under its chin, twisting hard. Black fluid sprayed, burning my gloves. The double spasmed, dissolved into tar. The others followed suit, collapsing into pools that seeped back into the fissure. The corridor fell silent again, save for the hum that never stopped. Ortega panted, wild-eyed. Cap, they're copying us. Every move, every word. It's inside our heads. Then we stopped giving it ammunition, I snapped. No fear, no panic. We control ourselves, or it controls us. Ulyanov met my gaze, his face carved from ice. He said nothing, but his eyes told me he understood. We pressed on, pushing through the stench and the pulse until we reached the auxiliary module. The door was half frozen, ice locking it in place. Together we forced it open, muscles screaming until the frame cracked and gave way. The supply tunnel yawned beyond, a narrow tube of steel leading upward, away from the station. My chest loosened for the first time in hours. Go, I ordered. Now. Ortega scrambled forward, almost sobbing with relief. Ulyanov followed, rifle at the ready. I brought up the rear. Halfway through the tunnel, the hum changed. It rose higher, sharper, vibrating the steel until rivets rattled loose. Frost rained down in flakes, and then the tunnel closed. Steel bulged inward, walls rippling like muscle contracting. Ahead of us, the exit sealed shut, a slab of metal fusing in place. Behind us, the tunnel pinched closed like a throat swallowing. We were trapped. Ortega pounded on the sealed exit, screaming, "No, no, no!" His fists split, blood smearing on unyielding steel. Ulyanov cursed in Russian, slamming a fresh mag into his rifle. He aimed at the wall, fired, bullets sparking uselessly. I pressed my hand against the wall. It was warm. Not metal anymore. Flesh, and beneath my palm, something beat. Slow, rhythmic, a heart. The station wasn't a prison anymore. It was a body, and we were inside it. The tunnel walls pulsed under my palm, warm and slick like living tissue. A heartbeat thudded through the steel, slow and deliberate, vibrating the marrow of my bones. Ortega pounded the sealed exit with bloodied fists, screaming curses that dissolved into sobs. Ulyanov reloaded with mechanical calm, though sweat streaked his frozen face. We weren't in a structure anymore. We were inside something alive, and it wanted us. Cap, Ortega's voice cracked. It's closing in on us. We're trapped. We're goddamn food in a throat. Shut it, I snapped, harsher than I meant. But panic spreads like fire. Ortega's terror was tinder. You lose it now. You're dead. Focus. The walls pressed closer, contracting slowly, squeezing the tunnel. Frost cracked, melted into rivulets of black fluid that dripped from the ceiling, sizzling where it landed. The air grew heavy, damp, carrying the stench of rot and salt water. I raised my rifle and fired into the narrowing passage ahead. Rounds punched through, sparking, but where steel should have given way, the wall convulsed. The holes closed, flesh knitting over like scar tissue. Bullets don't work, Ulyanov said flatly. My throat tightened. He was right. Bullets weren't going to kill a living station, but maybe explosives would. Frag! I barked. Ortega fumbled, hands shaking, but he pulled one from his vest. I grabbed it, yanked the pin, and hurled it down the sealed throat of the tunnel. The blast shook the world. Fire roared, heat washing over us, and the walls screamed, not metal tearing, something alive shrieking, a chorus of voices, ours and others, screaming in agony. When the smoke cleared, a hole gaped where the exit had sealed, jagged, burning, edges dripping black fluid. Beyond it, night sky. Snow. Freedom, move, I roared. Ortega scrambled through first, dragging himself into the snowfield. Ulyanov followed, covering our flank. I dove last, rolling onto the ice outside. Cold air stabbed my lungs. The silence of the tundra wrapped around us like salvation. For one heartbeat, I almost believed we were free. Then the ground trembled. Behind us, the station groaned. Steel bent, twisted, ruptured. Entire modules convulsed, rising as if on invisible strings. Frost spirals spread across the exterior walls, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Black fluid seeped from cracks, pooling on the snow like veins bursting under skin. The entire compound shifted. It was standing up. Run, I whispered. We bolted across the snowfield, boots sinking deep, breath tearing our chests. Behind us, the station convulsed again, modules stretching upward, merging, reshaping. Towers bent into limbs, antennas curled into spines. A silhouette too massive to comprehend rose against the frozen horizon, blotting out the stars. It wasn't a building anymore. It never had been. It was a shell, a cocoon. And whatever had lived beneath the ice had used steel and flesh to build itself a body. The hum became a roar, shaking the ground so violently I stumbled. Ortega grabbed my vest, yanking me upright. Cap! Cap! It's coming after us! I looked back once. Shouldn't have. The thing's new form loomed higher than any structure, black and glistening, bristling with mouths that screamed in 1,000 voices. Some were human, some weren't, and every one of them called my name. Elias Novak. The snow cracked beneath our feet. Fissures opened, black sludge bubbling up, seeping across the tundra like veins spreading through flesh. The land itself was being claimed. Ulyanov stopped, turned, raised his rifle. We cannot outrun it. His voice was sharp, final. I grabbed his shoulder, dragged him forward. We don't have to outrun it. We just have to survive long enough for exfil. He met my eyes. Something in them was breaking, but he followed. Ortega stumbled again, coughing blood, leaving red spatters in the snow. Cap, it's inside me. I can feel it. His voice was weak, desperate. I didn't answer. Couldn't, because I'd seen it. Black fluid spraying into his mouth when the appendage had grabbed him earlier. He wasn't lying. The thing was in him now, too. The hum rose louder. My own voice echoed on the wind, booming across the tundra. You can't leave me, Elias. The snowfield stretched endless ahead, horizon a blur of white and dark. No landmarks, no cover, just emptiness. Behind us, the station thing dragged itself free from the ice, a titan of steel and flesh, rising higher, its shadow swallowing the land. For the first time in years, I felt something I couldn't bury under training. Hopelessness. Still, I kept moving, because soldiers don't stop. Soldiers don't surrender. The air burned cold in my lungs, legs shaking, body breaking. Ortega lagged, stumbling harder, blood frothing his lips. Ulyanov pushed ahead, eyes fixed on the horizon, face locked in determination. And me, I just ran, because if I stopped, I'd hear it more clearly. The heartbeat, and it was getting closer. Snow crunched beneath our boots, each step sinking deep, pulling at our legs like quicksand. My lungs burned with every breath, the air razors in my chest. Behind us, the station beast groaned as it shifted, its silhouette blotting out the stars. Every time I dared to glance back, I saw its limbs rearranging, stretching further, dragging its bulk across the tundra like a nightmare dragging itself out of the earth. But Ortega was slowing us down. He stumbled for the third time in as many minutes, collapsing to one knee, coughing blood onto the snow. The red steamed against the frost, staining the white. I grabbed his arm, hauled him up, but he was dead weight, trembling like a man burning up inside despite the sub-zero cold. Cap, he gasped, voice raw. It's inside me, it's spreading. Ulyanov stopped a few paces ahead, rifle raised, scanning the horizon. His breath fogged steady, calm, but his eyes flicked back to Ortega. Hard, calculating. Ortega clutched his chest, gagging, then vomited black sludge into the snow. It hissed, eating through ice like acid. He collapsed forward, gasping. Please. Cap. Don't leave me. I froze, hand gripping his vest. His skin was hot even through the gloves, too hot. His veins bulged black, crawling up his neck toward his jaw. Ulyanov spoke, his voice flat as steel. He's gone. You know it. No. Ortega snarled, surprising us both with the force of it. His eyes flashed wide, bloodshot, pupils swallowed by black. I'm still me. Don't you dare say that. He reached for me, fingers shaking, and for a moment, for a single human moment, I saw Ortega again, the loud-mouthed American who cracked jokes on long marches, who once dragged me out of an ambush by sheer force of will. Then his voice broke. Cap, I can hear it. In my head, it's whispering your name. The snow around him pulsed faintly, black veins spreading from his vomit. I took a step back, rifle trembling in my grip. Ulyanov's tone sharpened, like a blade. We leave him, or we die with him. Don't you dare, Ortega rasped. He reached into his vest with shaking hands, pulled out a frag grenade, held it up, his eyes locked on mine. Cap, don't let me turn into that. Don't let it use me. The world seemed to narrow to the black sphere in his hand. Behind us, the hum grew louder, the ground vibrating beneath our boots. The beast was closing. Its shadow stretched longer across the snowfield, swallowing us whole. I swallowed hard. My throat ached, my heart tearing in two directions. Soldier and human, duty and loyalty. "We can carry you," I muttered. The words felt weak, pathetic, even as I said them. "No," Ortega hissed, his teeth clenched, veins bulging black against his temples. "You carry me, you carry it, and then it wins." He shoved the grenade into my chest. My gloves fumbled to hold it. He looked me dead in the eye, pupils swallowed by creeping black. "You know what you have to do." For the first time in years, my hands shook. Not from cold, from the weight of the choice. Ulyanov raised his rifle, eyes narrow, trigger finger white. "Captain, decide. Now." Ortega's body convulsed, black veins crawling faster, twisting his face into something unrecognizable. He screamed, not in pain, but in voices. A chorus of us. Ulyanov aimed. I moved first. The grenade pin slid free between my fingers. Ortega's eyes widened for a flicker of a second with something like gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered. Then I shoved him back into the snow and let the grenade fall into his chest. The blast lit the tundra, fire and sound tearing through the frozen silence. Snow exploded upward in a plume, blood and black fluid spraying high before freezing midair. When the smoke cleared, Ortega was gone. Only a scorched crater hissed where he'd been, black residue sizzling in the snow. I stood frozen, chest heaving, the echo of the blast ringing in my skull. My gloves were slick with his blood. My heart felt hollow, gutted. Ulyanov lowered his rifle. His voice was cold, merciless. He chose. "You honored it." But it didn't feel like honor. It felt like betrayal, like I'd killed my brother. The hum rolled across the tundra, louder now as if the beast had fed on the moment. On the choice, my choice. We turned back to the horizon. The snow stretched endless ahead, but I couldn't shake the certainty that we weren't running toward survival. We were running deeper into its territory. The tundra stretched in all directions, flat and merciless, but it no longer felt like open land. The snow shifted underfoot with a pulse that matched the heartbeat in the walls of the station. Only now there were no walls, only miles of ice. And still, it felt like we were inside something. Ulyanov pushed ahead, his silhouette cutting sharp against the pale glow of the moon. He moved like a machine, rifle ready, steps even, as though he could force the world to stay normal by sheer discipline. I followed, my legs heavy, lungs clawing for breath. Ortega's blood was still tacky on my gloves. Behind us, the station beast dragged itself higher into the sky, steel limbs fusing with bone, antennas twisting into spines. The shadow of it rolled across the snowfield like a tide. Every time it shifted, the ground shook, fissures opening in jagged lines that hissed with black fluid. The hum didn't just vibrate anymore. It spoke. Not words, not yet, but suggestions. A rhythm that crept into my thoughts, a pulse that almost matched my heartbeat. When I stumbled, I realized I'd been walking in time with it. Ulyanov noticed. His eyes cut toward me, sharp and accusing. "You feel it too." I didn't answer. Admitting it gave it power. We trudged on. The horizon never seemed closer. Hours might have passed, or minutes. It was impossible to tell. The cold gnawed into bone, but sweat drenched my back under the gear. My senses blurred, sound muffled, vision narrowed. Then the snow changed. At first it was subtle. The drifts formed patterns, spirals, curling inward, the same shape I'd seen on the chalkboard back in the lab. We passed one, then another, then a dozen, until the land was covered in whorls of wind-carved ice that weren't carved by wind at all. I stopped. The spirals weren't just shapes, they were moving, very slowly but undeniably, snow shifting inward grain by grain, always toward the center. Ulyanov cursed under his breath. "It reshapes the land." As if to prove his point, the snow beneath my boot buckled. I staggered back just as a fissure split open where I'd been standing. Black sludge bubbled up, steaming, filling the air with the stench of rot and salt. The fissure widened, spiraling outward. The ground itself was turning against us. "Run!" I barked. We sprinted across the snow, weaving between widening cracks. The spirals deepened, opening into pits, each one lined with black-veined ice. Voices rose from them, our voices, distorted, calling out in perfect mimicry. Elias. Yulianov. Help us. I forced my legs harder, lungs tearing, boots slipping on ice. The ground ahead stretched smooth for a moment, and we bolted into the opening. Then the smoothness moved. The snow rippled, waves spreading outward. Yulianov froze, eyes wide. It's under us. The surface cracked, a massive bulge rising like something beneath the ice pushed upward. The hum crescendoed, the pulse now deafening in my skull. My teeth rattled. The bulge split open. From the ice rose a form, not massive like the station beast, but smaller, humanoid. It clawed itself free, black and glistening, wearing a face I recognized. Ortega's. His mouth stretched in a wide, toothless grin, eyes void black. His voice was broken, layered with static, but the words were clear. Cap, you left me. My chest caved in. For a heartbeat, I saw him as he was, the man I'd fought beside, laughed with, buried in fire. Then the image twisted, his grin splitting wider, jaw cracking, black sludge spilling out. Yulianov didn't hesitate. He fired a burst into the thing's chest. It staggered, shrieked, and lunged. I met it head on. My knife drove under its chin again, twisting. The body convulsed, dissolved into sludge that seeped back into the ice. But the voice lingered in the air, Ortega's voice. Why did you leave me, Eli? I stumbled back, panting, throat raw. My hands shook around the knife. Yulianov grabbed my shoulder, his grip iron. His face was pale, but his eyes were fire. It's not him. Do not let it in. I nodded, though my heart refused to believe. The land shuddered again. More bulges rose around us, dozens, each one splitting open. Figures clawed free, shapes half-formed, some with my face, some with Yulianov's, some with faces I didn't know. They rose in a circle, surrounding us in the endless snowfield. Every voice spoke at once. You are already part of us. Yulianov raised his rifle, teeth bared. We can't shoot forever. No, I rasped. My mind raced, scraping for strategy, for anything but surrender. But maybe we don't have to. Because in the distance, barely visible through the frost haze, I saw something. A light. Faint. Flickering, like a beacon. Hope, or another trap. Either way, it was all we had left. Move, I shouted, toward the light. And we ran, the circle of doppelgangers closing in, their black mouths open, our own voices screaming in the wind. The light flickered through the frost haze like a dying star, barely visible, but enough to keep my legs moving when every muscle screamed to stop. Yulianov ran at my side, his breathing ragged but steady, rifle clutched tight. The circle of things, duplicates, shadows, whatever they were, closed around us, black sludge dripping from their jaws, their mouths spilling our voices back into the night. Elias, Yulianov. Don't run. Stay. The words hit like bullets, but we didn't break stride. Survival meant momentum. Stop, and you were already dead. Snow cracked under our boots. The spirals in the ice shifted, rearranging to funnel us away from the light, trying to herd us back toward the station beast looming on the horizon. It dragged itself across the tundra, too vast to comprehend, its shadow devouring the land. Each time it shifted, the heartbeat roared louder in my chest, like my ribs were bars in its cage. The first duplicate lunged. It was me. My face, my stance, even my voice when it screamed, "Contact!" before raising its rifle in perfect mimicry. Yulianov fired without hesitation. The thing collapsed, black sludge spraying, but three more stepped forward in its place, each with my face, each aiming weapons at us. I gunned one down, knife flashing to gut another, but the third slammed into me, heavier than it should have been. Its hands wrapped around my throat, grip like iron. Its face twisted into a grotesque grin, my grin, before it leaned close. You'll never leave. I jammed the knife under its jaw, tore upward. Black ichor sprayed across my visor. The body dissolved, slumping into tar that hissed against the snow. I staggered upright, throat burning, vision swimming. Yulianov covered me, precision shots snapping duplicates one after another. His discipline was unshakable, even here, even now. But for every one that fell, two more rose from fissures in the ice, clawing upward with half-formed faces and hollow eyes. We can't fight them all, I roared. Then we don't, Yulianov snapped, grabbing my arm. His voice was ice. We run, We bolted again, shoving through the horde. Figures clawed at us, voices screaming our names, Ortega's laughter, Jensen's cries, my mother's whispers. Every voice I'd ever buried followed me into the snow. My boots slipped, legs burning, lungs on fire, but the beacon glowed brighter with each desperate step. Closer now. Maybe half a click. It wasn't just a light, it was a tower. A skeletal antenna jutting from the ice, its bulb flickering weakly, throwing shadows that twisted in the storm. It looked ancient, older than the research station, half buried in snow like a relic no one remembered. Hope or bait. Either way, it was all we had. We fought through the last line of duplicates. Ulyanov gunned them down with cold precision, each shot echoing like punctuation in the frozen air. I cut through another with the knife, black spray burning my skin where it landed, but I didn't stop. The beacon loomed above us now, its light sputtering, buzzing with faint electricity. We crashed into the snow at its base, gasping, broken. For one fragile second, silence. The horde stopped at the edge of the light. Dozens of figures ringed around us, faces blank, eyes void. They didn't step closer. The light kept them back. Ulyanov stared up, chest heaving. It repels them. Or it's waiting, I muttered, my voice raw. My throat burned from the choke, my chest tight from the heartbeat hammering in my ribs. Maybe both. The duplicates stood frozen, a wall of ourselves staring in unison. Their mouths opened together, and from them came one voice, deep, layered, vibrating through marrow. You cannot leave. The ground shuddered. The beacon light flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. For the first time since entering this nightmare, I felt something like choice. The tower hummed faintly, alive with old power. If we could boost it, turn the signal outward, maybe it could cut through the thing's influence. Maybe it could reach command, or maybe it would call something worse. Ulyanov looked at me, face pale, eyes burning. We have two options, he said, voice sharp as a knife. We hold here until it tears us apart, or we turn this on. My gaze lifted to the beacon's flickering bulb, the hum in its bones. My hands trembled around the rifle. Behind us, the Titan moved, dragging itself closer, its shape blotting out the stars. The duplicates shifted at the edge of the light, waiting, patient, their faces unreadable masks of us. There was no time, no safety, no guarantee, only choice. I forced the words out, each one tasting like blood. Then we turn it on. Ulyanov's jaw clenched. He nodded once. We shouldered our rifles, turned to the base of the beacon, and started to climb. And all around us, the voices rose, screaming in perfect unison. Elias Novak, you belong to us. The climb felt endless. Ice clung to the rungs of the beacon's ladder, each step biting through gloves, each breath a knife in my lungs. The tower groaned under our weight, steel warped by decades of storms and something older stirring beneath. Below, the ring of duplicates waited, motionless in the snow. A wall of faces, ours and theirs, all blank-eyed, all watching. The Titan loomed on the horizon, dragging its grotesque body across the tundra, its limbs fusing with steel, ice, and bone. Every movement shook the ground. Every heartbeat thudded inside my chest like my own pulse no longer belonged to me. Ulyanov climbed just ahead, his breath fogging in quick bursts. He didn't speak. Neither of us did. Words felt dangerous now, like giving the thing more weapons. At the top, the beacon's bulb flickered, sputtering weakly. The control box was a rusted corpse of switches and dials, half frozen, half fused with frost. I yanked it open, metal screeching, wires spilling out like veins. Ulyanov covered the ladder with his rifle, eyes scanning the sea of duplicates below. "Can you make it work?" "I'll make it work," I muttered. My hands shook as I tore at the wiring, scraping frost from copper, forcing life into a machine that had no right to still exist. Sparks bit my gloves, the smell of ozone mixing with the stench of rot that rolled from the horizon. The duplicates stirred. One stepped closer to the beacon's base, then stopped as the light flickered brighter. Their mouths opened in unison. "Do not." The word hit like a shockwave, vibrating the steel under my boots. The beacon's light dimmed, then steadied. My heart pounded, sweat freezing on my skin. I ripped another wire free, twisted it into place. The beacon groaned. A low hum rose through the frame, climbing into a wail that cut across the tundra. The light flared, brighter than before. The duplicates shrieked, their voices layered into a single howl. Some dissolved into black sludge on the spot, writhing like worms. But the Titan only moved faster. It reared higher, towering against the sky, its vast body bristling with mouths and eyes that screamed and blinked in chaos. Its shadow swallowed the land as it lurched toward us, every step cracking the tundra wide open. Ulyanov fired, futile shots snapping in the dark, his jaw clenched. "Faster, Captain!" I jammed the last wire into place. Sparks exploded, searing my hand through the glove. The beacon screamed to life, light bursting outward in a cone that swept across the snowfield. The effect was instant. The duplicates convulsed, their forms dissolving into sludge that hissed into the ice. Their voices cut short mid-word, leaving only silence. The Titan staggered, limbs jerking. The hum faltered. For one heartbeat, I believed. Then the voices came back, stronger than ever. Not from the duplicates, not from the Titan, from the beacon itself. The light flickered, pulsed. Words poured from the speaker grill in my own voice, Ulyanov's voice, Ortega's, Jensen's, my mother's. "You cannot run. You cannot hide. You are signal now." The light wavered, bending. Not outward anymore, inward. Ulyanov spun, eyes wide. "You turned it into an amplifier." For it. My chest clenched. He was right. The beacon hadn't repelled the thing. It had given it a voice, a broadcast, a way out. The Titan roared, but it wasn't rage. It was triumph. Its voices poured through the beacon, layered, infinite, carried into the sky. I gripped the control box, shaking, trying to rip the wires free. Sparks bit my face, smoke burned my throat, but the light only grew brighter, the sound louder. The signal was no longer ours to control. Ulyanov's hand clamped my shoulder. His eyes, ice blue, unflinching, met mine. "We ended here." He pulled a thermite charge from his vest. The last one. My throat closed. I knew what he was asking, what he was offering. He shoved it into my hand. "You know what to do. Go." I stared at him, frozen. He didn't give me time. He turned, rifle raised, and opened fire down the ladder as black sludge surged upward, climbing the rungs like veins. His voice was steady, sharp. "Go." I moved. Down the ladder, boots slipping, heart hammering, beacons screaming above me. The duplicates surged back from the snow, rising again, faces blank, voices shrieking. The Titan leaned closer, its mass blotting out the stars. I hit the ground running, fumbling with the charge in my hand. The beacon glared behind me, a false sun screaming in every voice I'd ever known. Ulyanov's fire rattled overhead and then cut off. A moment later, light brighter than the sun ripped across the tundra. The beacon imploded in a roar of fire and steel, fragments raining across the ice. The duplicates collapsed, shrieking as their bodies melted into sludge. The Titan reeled back, its shadow breaking apart in the firestorm. For a heartbeat, the hum faltered, silence sweeping the world. I staggered, fell to my knees in the snow, lungs clawing for air, ears ringing. The night was dark again, still, empty, but only for a moment. The hum returned, soft at first, then deeper, louder, filling the cracks of the earth. The horizon pulsed faintly with spirals of light, glowing beneath the ice like veins beneath skin. The Titan wasn't gone. The prison was broken. And I realized then, Ulyanov hadn't saved me. He hadn't saved anyone. He'd only given it what it wanted, another chance to spread. The hum thudded through the ice, syncing with my pulse. I pressed my hand to my chest and felt it. The second heartbeat. And in the silence of the Siberian night, I heard my own voice whisper back at me. "You belong to us now." My name is Amelia Kovacs, and I'm a wildlife biologist. I study apex predators, mostly wolves, though I've spent enough time in the field to know that studying animals can sometimes feel like inviting danger. I like to think I'm cautious, methodical, and analytical, but out here in the Carpathian Mountains, I've begun to question that self-image. The morning air was sharp, biting at my cheeks and lungs as I trudged along a narrow ridge. Snow had begun to coat the pine trees in thin, crystalline layers, each branch trembling with the weight. Mist hovered low in the valleys, and the peaks above were obscured by ragged clouds that moved too quickly for comfort. The silence was remarkable. No birds, no insects, Nothing but the crunch of my boots on frost-crusted ground. Even the wind seemed muted, reduced to a faint whisper that stirred the branches just enough to make them groan. I was alone, my two fellow researchers having returned to the base days ago due to a sudden storm warning. I'd stayed behind, unwilling to abandon the last weeks of observations on a small, elusive wolf pack. I rationalized my decision as dedication, but the creeping unease I felt was hard to dismiss. There was something different about the forest here, something in the way shadows pooled beneath the trees, shifting even when the sun broke through the clouds. The silence wasn't just the absence of life, it felt deliberate, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. I paused at the edge of a frozen stream, listening. The water whispered beneath the ice, a faint murmur like distant voices. For a moment, I thought I heard a human voice calling my name. Amelia. It was soft, almost pleading. My heart stuttered, and I turned sharply, scanning the tree line. Nothing. Just the mist and the rigid black trunks of pines. I told myself it was my imagination. Wolves have an uncanny knack for playing tricks on the senses. Shadows move, wind carries distant calls, and loneliness can do strange things to the mind. I pressed on, reminding myself that fear in the field is normal. Survival requires observation, not panic. As I climbed higher, the temperature dropped even further. My breath came in visible clouds, and frost formed along my eyelashes. The landscape stretched out below me, valleys swallowed in fog. The trees grew denser here, gnarled and twisted, their trunks slick with ice. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that some unseen eyes were tracing my movements with patience and precision. And then it happened again. That voice, faint but unmistakable, came from just beyond the next ridge. Amelia, help me. It was eerily familiar, like a memory, but no one was supposed to be here. My pulse spiked. I scanned the forest, catching only fleeting glimpses of movement, shadows flickering at the edge of my vision, disappearing before I could focus on them. Instinct took over. I slowed my pace, crouching behind a frost-covered boulder, my notebook and camera clutched against my chest. I knew from experience that predators like wolves often stalk quietly, testing prey. But this wasn't normal. I'd never encountered anything like it. The voice sounded again, closer now, almost beside me. I spun around, expecting a colleague, a hiker, someone, but the space was empty. A low, guttural growl vibrated through the fog, unlike any wolf I'd ever heard. It was deep, deliberate, intelligent. My stomach churned. The creature wasn't just hunting, it was taunting. I had no plan for what came next, only a rising dread that each step forward might be my last. I forced myself to move, keeping low, sticking to the frozen underbrush for cover. My mind raced with strategies. If it was a predator mimicking voices, staying still and silent might confuse it. But the forest itself seemed alive, shifting around me, shadows stretching and twisting. Even the snow seemed to cling to the edges of the trees unnaturally, muffling sounds. Every snap of a branch beneath my boots was deafening. Suddenly, a rustling from above made me freeze. Pine needles showered down as if a heavy branch had been disturbed, but there was no one there. Then, a voice again, this time urgent, pleading, "Amelia, don't leave me." The tone, the timbre, everything about it, some instinct deep in me screamed that it was not human, and yet it sounded human enough to make me hesitate. I glanced around desperately for a place to hide, realizing that the cliff edge behind me offered no sanctuary. The fog thickened, curling around the trees like smoke, reducing visibility to mere feet. My hands shook as I gripped my camera and notebook. The growl returned, closer, almost beneath me, vibrating through the frozen ground. I needed to think. My job had trained me to remain calm, to analyze, to act logically. I scanned the surroundings, noting natural features, the rocks, the streams, the trees thick enough to conceal movement. If I could keep the terrain between us, I might evade it. But the fog was its ally, concealing it perfectly. And then I saw it, for a fraction of a second. A shape moving through the mist, humanoid but not human. Too tall, too lithe, its limbs unnaturally long, its head tilted in a way no human could manage. The moment it vanished behind a tree, I realized the truth. This thing was hunting me, studying me, learning from me. I swallowed my fear and forced my legs to move, breaking into a cautious run along the ridge, hugging the tree line. The voice screamed again, overlapping with the growls, overlapping with my own panicked breathing. My mind raced. Traps, distractions, anything. I grabbed a handful of snow and hurled it at a nearby tree, hoping it might confuse the predator. The creature responded immediately, vanishing into the fog, only for the voice to echo right behind me, terrifyingly close. I didn't stop running. The cliff edge loomed, the forest swallowed me whole, and yet the voice followed, impossible to escape. And somewhere deep in the mist, I knew the creature was laughing, or something like it, something that sounded not entirely human. I forced myself to slow, though every instinct screamed to keep moving. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I needed to think. Panic is a predator's advantage, and this, whatever it was far smarter than any wolf I'd ever tracked. I crouched behind a cluster of frost-covered pines, pressing my back to the bark, straining to hear over my own heartbeat. The forest was silent, or as silent as it could be. The growls had stopped, at least for the moment, but the fog had thickened, wrapping everything in a gray haze that dulled the sunlight and swallowed shapes. And yet I could feel it watching. Every instinct in my body screamed that the creature was near, perhaps above me, perhaps circling, learning. I reminded myself that predators rely on patterns. If I broke mine, I could throw it off. I adjusted my path, backtracking along a ridge I'd passed an hour ago, slipping behind boulders, ducking into ravines, always keeping the landscape between myself and the unseen eyes. But the voice found me again. "Emilia, it's cold. Come to me." This time it wasn't just a whisper. It was more insistent, desperate. It sounded like my own voice, cracked and trembling, as though I were calling myself from some distant, frozen cave. My stomach lurched. I knew it was a trick, a mimicry designed to lure me into vulnerability, but a part of me, a dangerous, human part, wanted to respond. I shook my head violently, muttering to myself, "Focus. You are a biologist. You are not prey yet." I scanned the surrounding area for resources, a fallen log, jagged rocks, anything I could use to defend myself or create a distraction. My hand closed around a thick branch, roughly as long as my forearm. It was no weapon, but it could buy me time. I moved again, slower now, more deliberately. Each step was calculated, each breath quiet. But then the snow beneath my boots shifted strangely, too heavy, too deliberate. I froze. The fog seemed to warp around me, and there it was. I saw it, just beyond a tree line, its shape fluid, almost liquid in the gray light. It tilted its head the same way a predator does when it studies prey, measuring fear, testing reaction. I couldn't tell its size exactly. It seemed taller than me, but not human. Its limbs were elongated, unnaturally jointed. Its face, oh God, its face. I could make out only a vague, shifting semblance of a human mask, but wrong in ways that made my stomach twist. It moved with deliberate intelligence, deliberately pacing me, herding me, as if I were livestock. I gripped the branch tighter. "I will not panic," I whispered, mostly to myself. "I will think. I will survive." The creature's voice came again, mimicking the tone of one of my colleagues. "Emilia, don't leave me, please." I forced myself to ignore it. I had to, but then it changed tactics. The fog thickened ahead of me, and from it, shapes began to emerge. Other shadows, rocks, trees, I couldn't tell. One of them moved toward me with precision, slithering through the mist. My pulse skyrocketed. The rational part of my brain told me to flee, but another, darker part, trained to track, to anticipate, told me to observe. I ducked behind a massive pine and crouched. My breath came in short, frantic bursts. The shadow passed, pausing for a moment to tilt its head toward me, studying, always studying. Then it vanished. I realized something chilling. This thing was learning from me. It knew my reactions, my hesitations. Each time I moved, it adapted. Each time I paused, it exploited my pause. This wasn't a simple predator. This was a hunter of minds, capable of understanding, of manipulating. Panic began to claw at me again. I forced myself to focus. If I could reach the old ranger cabin I'd passed 2 days ago, I might have a chance. It wasn't far, maybe half a mile, but the terrain was treacherous, slick with ice and hidden crevices. I darted from tree to tree, keeping the dense undergrowth between myself and the mist, keeping my ears straining for any sound that wasn't my own. And then I heard it, behind me, a soft, almost musical whistle. I froze instantly. That sound was familiar, impossibly familiar. My own whistle I used in the field to call wolves. I hadn't made a sound like that in years. It was mocking me. I ran, no longer cautiously, no longer measured. The fog swallowed me, and the forest became a maze of white and gray shapes. Every snap of a branch underfoot seemed amplified, every rustle of leaves a threat. I reached the cabin finally, its dark silhouette barely visible through the fog. I yanked the door open, stumbling inside, and slammed it shut. Inside, the air was stale, dust and mildew thick in the dim light filtering through frost-crusted windows. I barricaded the door with a heavy chair, then sank to the floor, heart hammering. My eyes scanned the room, a decrepit fireplace, a collapsed table, and shadows that didn't move, but that could. The growl came again from outside, low and vibrating through the wood, and then, impossibly, from inside the cabin, a whisper. "Emilia, I'm here." I bolted to the window, peering into the fog. Nothing. Just the mist curling around the trees, silent except for my own ragged breathing. My mind raced. I had survived encounters with dangerous animals before, but this was something else entirely. Intelligent, patient, capable of mimicking, of learning, of manipulating fear itself. I had no weapons, no backup. My only chance was to wait until it left or until the storm came to cover my escape. But I knew, deep down, that it wouldn't simply leave. Not until it had tested every corner of my mind, every weakness, every instinct. And as I sat there, frozen with fear and adrenaline, I realized the worst part. I was still trapped in its territory. I might escape the cabin, the ridge, even the valley, but the Carpathians, the forest, it was home, and I was its prey. I gripped my branch and whispered to myself, I survive, I observe, I endure. But even as I said it, I knew the truth. The forest was still watching. The voice would come again, the shadow would appear, and I would not know where or when. Night fell quickly in the mountains, dragging the forest into a deeper shade of gray that was almost black. The cabin felt like a coffin. The shadows were thick and alive, pressing against the walls as though the fog itself had seeped inside. I hadn't slept in hours. My mind was a taut wire of fear and focus, but exhaustion was a double-edged sword. It dulled my reflexes, yet sharpened my perception. Every whisper, every shifting shadow seemed louder, closer. I knew I couldn't stay here forever. The creature was clever enough to wait, patient enough to starve me into leaving. My only hope was to escape while it miscalculated, while the storm outside gave me cover. I checked the door. It had held, though I could see faint scratches along the wood, marks that hadn't been there before. Whoever or whatever was out there had tested it, just like it had tested me. I pressed myself against the wall, listening. The forest beyond the window was silent, almost serene, but the air carried an unnatural chill, like something had sucked warmth from the night itself. And then I heard it, a soft, deliberate tapping. Wood on wood. The sound was inside the cabin now. My breath caught, and I gripped the branch tighter. The tapping stopped. Silence. And then the voice, low, almost intimate. "Emilia, don't leave me." It was my own voice again. Perfectly mimicked, exactly as I sounded to myself moments before. I couldn't breathe. The creature was inside the room, or at least close enough to convince me it was. My body screamed to run, to hide, but there was nowhere left to go. Instinct overrode fear. I hurled the branch toward the corner of the cabin where the sound seemed to originate. It struck the floor with a heavy crash. Silence again. Then a faint rustling, like something shifting in the shadows. My eyes darted around trying to catch a glimpse, and for a moment I saw it, a tall, thin shape, limbs bending impossibly, head tilting unnaturally. It vanished before I could blink. I ran for the back door, unbarricading it with trembling hands. The storm had begun, thick sleet and wind, and the fog was heavier than ever. I stumbled into it, every step treacherous on icy ground. The forest swallowed me, yet I could sense it following, not rushing, but calculating my path. Branches clawed at my face and arms, snow and ice stinging my skin, but I pressed on. The valley stretched out below me, moonlight faintly breaking through the clouds, reflecting on frozen streams. I spotted a faint trail leading toward a ranger outpost I had noted on my maps. A chance for safety. Then the voice again, whispering from every direction at once, overlapping, creating a cacophony of my own voice, my colleagues' voices, cries and laughter I'd never heard before. "Amelia, come to me. You can't hide." I froze. Panic clawed at me, threatening to paralyze. But I forced myself forward, putting one foot in front of the other, thinking like a predator now, predicting its moves. If it wanted me to panic, I wouldn't give it the satisfaction. The snow-covered trees shifted. A shadow flitted in my peripheral vision, too fast to track, almost like the fog itself had formed a shape. My mind raced. It can mimic, it can stalk, it can vanish. How do you fight something that isn't fully there? I reached the edge of a frozen stream, the outpost faintly visible across the ice. I ran, slipping, scrambling, barely keeping my balance. The shadow followed, just at the edge of perception, moving unnaturally, always silent until it wanted to be heard. Then a loud, gurgling growl erupted from the fog directly behind me, a sound so primal, so intelligent, it froze my blood. I leapt across a gap in the ice, landing hard, pain shooting through my ankle. I could feel it, hear it, smell it, closing in. But the wind and storm were my allies now, masking my movement. I crawled the last few meters, slipping into the faint light of the outpost. Inside, the warmth was feeble but real. I slammed the door, bolted it, and collapsed against it, heaving breaths. The storm outside raged, masking all sound. I sat there trembling, listening. Silence, no growls, no voice. The fog pressed against the windows, but it didn't enter. I survived. For now. But the forest had not. The creature was still out there, waiting, learning. Somewhere in the Carpathians, it lurked in the fog, patient, intelligent, hungry. And I knew deep down that this encounter was only a fraction of what it could do. I sat in the ranger outpost, staring out at the storm, gripping my notebook and branch, heart still hammering. My mind circled back to one undeniable truth. I had escaped, yes. But the voice, the shadow, the intelligence that stalked the mountains would find another. And it would be ready. The mountains were not empty. I was not alone. And whatever had hunted me tonight was not finished. I'm Mateo Calderon, a wildlife biologist, and I should probably be dead tired from the trek. But something in the Patagonian forest has me wired in a way that no caffeine could ever manage. I came here to study nocturnal predators, to log the behavior of species that barely show themselves to humans. It's the kind of work that requires patience, methodical note-taking, and an acceptance that most nights, nothing will happen at all. That's why being alone out here didn't bother me. Until now. The forest stretches endlessly, a tangle of silver-barked trees draped in moss that glows faintly under the pale moonlight. Fog snakes between the trunks like living veins, carrying the damp, pungent scent of earth and decay. Every step I take presses my boots into a soil so soft it almost feels like the forest is swallowing me. Somewhere above, a crow's raucous caw cuts through the stillness, but otherwise the only sounds are the crunch of leaves underfoot and the distant drip of rain from saturated branches. Even so, there's a rhythm here, a strange heartbeat that makes the forest feel alive, like it's listening. I set up my small camp near a bend in a narrow creek, the water trickling with a soft, metallic hiss. My journal, flashlight, and camera are all carefully laid out. The sun dipped hours ago, leaving the canopy dense with shadows so thick they might as well be walls. I usually love nights like this, cold air clinging to my jacket, mist curling around my collar. But tonight, there's a slight offness, a tension beneath the wind's whistling that I can't shake. It started as a whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind threading through the trees, but then it sharpened, subtle, deliberate, a syllable I almost recognized. I froze mid-step, straining my ears. Nothing. A heartbeat later, it came again, clearer, like someone murmuring my name just beyond the fog. I told myself it was my mind playing tricks. Biologists alone in remote forests develop strange phobias after a few days. My rational brain reminded me, there are no humans here, no settlements for miles, only wildlife. But the whispering persisted, echoing in and around me, impossibly soft, impossibly intimate, and somehow wrong. I grabbed my flashlight and swept it across the trees, catching the glint of wet leaves, a few reflective eyes too high to be anything I know. I whispered back, my voice trembling against the sound of the creek. Nothing answered. Or, if it did, it was careful, calculated. I tried to convince myself to relax, to record notes in my journal, but my pen hovered, shaking. There's a reason the locals whisper about El Susurrante, the whisperer. They say it doesn't just hunt you, it studies you, learns from your habits, and uses what you fear most against you. Superstitious nonsense, I thought. Yet, as I settled by the creek, every snapping twig and rustle of leaves felt intentional, as if the forest itself were plotting. The first real proof came hours later. I'd left the camera on a tripod near a clearing to capture nocturnal mammals, and when I checked it, the SD card had been disturbed. Footprints, small, clawed, not quite human, circled the device. I froze. My heart thundered in my ears, but my training took over. Catalog, document, don't panic. The prints ended abruptly, as if whoever or whatever had left them had vanished into the shadows. The whispering returned, now closer. My name, perfectly mimicked, calling from just beyond the tree line. I scanned the darkness with my flashlight, sweeping slowly, methodically. The beam caught something moving at the edge of the fog, a dark shape that melted back into the mist before I could get a proper look. Then silence. I retreated into my tent, shivering not entirely from the cold. The forest pressed against the canvas walls, alive with unknown intent. I tried to sleep, but every creak of branches, every snap of a twig sent jolts through my body. Something out there was watching, waiting, learning, and I knew it wasn't just random chance, it was intelligent. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time is slippery in these forests. I eventually crawled out, desperate for a glance at the creek under the silver moon. The fog had thickened, curling around me like fingers. The whispering wasn't just in my ears anymore. It was around me. It mimicked the sound of the creek, my own breathing, the rustle of my jacket. It was everywhere, nowhere, impossible to locate. I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the darkness. Movement, a shadow darting between trees, graceful, deliberate. I raised my voice, calling out, hoping to startle whatever it was, but it simply froze, listening. Then it vanished, leaving a sudden, crushing silence. I've spent my life studying creatures, understanding behavior, predicting movement. But out here, nothing follows the rules I know. The whisperer doesn't act like an animal. It adapts instantly, reading every twitch, every breath, every flicker of thought. And now I realize I'm its study. I can feel it circling, learning me, anticipating my movements. I'm forced to improvise, then retreating deeper into the creek's bends, moving silently, checking reflections in water, even using my own voice to mislead it. But every tactic is temporary. Every time I think I've lost it, the whispering returns, closer than before, almost inside my skull. Something snaps in the forest. A branch cracks sharply behind me. I whirl, flashlight swinging wildly, and catch the shape for a fraction of a second. Long, sinewy limbs, eyes reflecting light like molten metal, a face obscured but horrifyingly human-like. The air fills with that same whispering, 1,000 faint echoes of my own thoughts, calling me to step closer. I ran. Not in panic, but in calculated bursts, keeping to the undergrowth, trying to mask my scent, moving like the creatures I study. But every step feels anticipated, every direction dangerous. The whisperer isn't just hunting, it's toying with me, testing boundaries, making me doubt everything I know. And then, silence. I can't see it, I can't hear it, but I know it's there, always there, waiting. And as I write this now, I sit by the creek at dawn, drenched in sweat, still shaking, still alive. But the forest is holding its secrets close, whispering them just out of reach. I have escaped it, for now. But I know one thing. El Susurrante doesn't just stalk bodies, it hunts minds. And somewhere just beyond the fog, it's waiting for me to make a mistake. I didn't sleep again that night. Not really. My body rested in fits of exhausted dozing, but my mind was a storm. Every shadow seemed alive, every rustle a potential threat. The whisperer had disappeared at dawn, but its absence felt deliberate, calculated. I know it was still there, learning, observing. Somewhere in the dense fog and twisted branches, it was studying me. I decided to move deeper into the forest, away from the creek. The canopy here grew tighter, ancient trees woven into thick curtains of moss. The air was heavier, damp with condensation, filled with the pungent aroma of rotting wood and something else I couldn't name, a faint metallic tang that made the back of my throat dry. My flashlight cut through the fog in narrow beams, illuminating webs glistening with moisture, and the occasional reflective eyes that belonged to the forest's natural nocturnal life. But I had to ignore them. My attention was fixed on the whispering. It started as a soft murmur, barely audible at first, then a whisper that sounded exactly like my own voice. "Mateo, come here." My stomach twisted. I froze. This wasn't mimicry anymore. It was manipulation. The whisperer was using me, drawing me out, testing my reactions. I reminded myself, I know animal behavior. I know patterns. I can't let it predict me. I improvised. I stopped moving, crouched low, and deliberately made noise in the opposite direction, throwing a small branch to mislead it. The whispering faltered for a moment, then multiplied. Dozens of voices, all mine, overlapping, circling me. It was almost musical, an eerie symphony that made the hairs on my neck rise. I kept moving, staying calm, like calculating each step like I would when tracking a wild predator. But this wasn't a wild predator. This was something else, something intelligent. Hours blurred together. The fog thickened, pressing against my clothes, my skin. My flashlight illuminated fleeting movements between the trees, shapes too quick and too precise to be animals I knew. Then I saw it. A silhouette perched on a branch high above, perfectly still, impossibly quiet. Its head tilted, studying me, gauging me. I held my breath, raising the camera to take a single shot, only for it to vanish mid-blink, like it had melted into the fog. Panic threatened to overtake reason. I forced myself to focus, track the ground, watch the shadows, anticipate its moves. I had to survive long enough to understand it. My instincts screamed at me to flee in one direction, but my mind argued, no predictable patterns, no panicked routes. Move unpredictably like prey, but prey that fights back with knowledge, rests with cunning. The whisperer's attacks escalated. Footsteps mimicking mine echoed behind me, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, always teasing. Occasionally the voice would call out to me, not in words but in thoughts, memories, doubts, things I thought long buried. "Mateo, why did you leave them?" It whispered my guilt, my mistakes, my fears. It wasn't just hunting my body, it was hunting my mind. I found a hollow tree, wide enough to hide my body. Inside I crouched, barely breathing, as the forest seemed to close in. Outside, the whispering continued, now a distorted chorus of my own inner voice. I held the flashlight low, scanning for movement. The whisperer circled, slow, deliberate, invisible in the fog. And then I saw it. Two glowing points of light, red and orange, reflecting off wet leaves, moving closer, testing my patience, my resolve. I had an idea. Using my knowledge of animal behavior, I baited it. I set a trail of scent using scraps of meat I'd brought as bait for camera traps. It followed, silent and precise. The whisperer didn't attack immediately. It studied, it calculated, circling the bait like a predator playing with an insect. I watched, trembling, heart hammering. One wrong move and it would be upon me. Then the impossible happened. Something huge leapt from the shadows, faster than I could follow with my eyes, snatched the bait, and disappeared. Silence returned. For the first time in hours, I exhaled, shaking uncontrollably. I knew I had bought myself time, maybe hours, maybe less, but I also knew it had learned from me, just as I had learned from it. This forest wasn't neutral. I was a participant in its rules now, a subject under observation. By midday, I stumbled onto a small clearing with a pool of stagnant water. I drank, washed my face, and tried to think. Every survival instinct screamed at me to leave, to find higher ground, to escape. But the whisperer had anticipated escape routes. The forest twisted unpredictably, Paths I thought familiar ended abruptly, blocked by thickets or cliffs I hadn't noticed before. It was clever, adaptive, omnipresent. That night I heard it clearly for the first time, not in whispers, but in a mimicry so exact it froze my blood. The voice of my closest friend, dead for 3 years, calling me from behind the trees. I wanted to answer, to comfort, to verify, but I didn't. My hands shook around the flashlight, every instinct screaming that this was a trap. Then I saw it again. Not a shadow this time, not a fleeting glimpse. A figure emerged from the fog, humanoid in shape, long limbs moving with impossible precision, head cocked at a disturbingly human angle. The eyes burned like molten metal. It stopped, studied me, and in an instant disappeared. The whispering lingered, as though it had just brushed past my mind. I ran blindly into the fog, stumbling, cutting myself on branches, muscles screaming, lungs burning. I didn't stop until I reached the creek, the same bend where I had first set camp. My own tracks in the mud were a maze, my escape unpredictable enough to confuse my pursuer. I didn't look back. I dared not. Dawn broke, weak and pale, filtering through the fog like dim water. I'm here now, hiding, documenting everything I can, trying to make sense of what I've seen. The Whisperer hasn't left. I know it hasn't. And though I survived this night, I know the forest will claim me if I'm careless. It watches, it learns, it waits, and somewhere in the twisted maze of moss and fog, it's thinking. By the third night, I had stopped keeping track of time. Hours blurred into one another, and the forest had become a trap I could no longer escape with logic alone. Every step I took was calculated, every sound analyzed. Yet no matter what I did, I could feel it. El Susurrante was always there, a presence at the edge of perception, patient and clever. I decided to make a stand. I couldn't continue running forever. I needed to see it, to understand it, even if it meant risking everything. Using my knowledge of predator behavior, I created a small clearing surrounded by makeshift barriers, rocks, branches, and whatever debris I could carry. I baited the center with scraps of meat, scent heavily manipulated to confuse any potential prey and predator. Then I waited, hidden in the undergrowth, flashlight off, breath held, muscles coiled like a spring. Hours passed. The forest was unnaturally quiet. The usual chorus of nocturnal creatures had vanished, as if they sensed the presence of something more dangerous than themselves. My pulse drummed in my ears, and then I heard it. The whispering, soft at first, weaving through the fog like smoke, curling around the trees, forming words I didn't recognize. It spoke in voices I hadn't heard before, whispers of strangers, of travelers who had vanished here long ago. A shadow moved, longer than it should have been, fluid in motion yet deliberate. I froze. It didn't step forward, it drifted, almost gliding, circling the bait. My stomach twisted. Then it stopped, just beyond the clearing, and tilted its head at me, studying me as I had studied countless animals in my career. But this wasn't just observation. There was intelligence, cunning, and cruelty behind those eyes that glowed like molten metal. I considered my options. Fire could work, but smoke would reveal my position. A loud shout might provoke it, but provoke it into what? It was a trap waiting to happen. My survival instincts screamed at me to retreat, to leave the bait, to run, but the logic of understanding it demanded I stay. And so I stayed, trembling, crouched in shadow, clutching my camera and journal as if they were weapons. Then it spoke. Not in whispers, not in mimicry. This time, a single word, perfectly clear, Mateo. My blood ran cold. It knew me. Somehow it had learned my name, my voice, my presence. It circled again, closer now, until the fog thickened around me so completely that I could see nothing but shapes, indistinct, twisting. The forest itself seemed to pulse with its intent. I panicked for a moment, only a moment, and then forced myself to act. Using the patterns I had observed in animal hunting behaviors, I feigned a retreat, dragging my voice, leaving scent trails that suggested vulnerability. The Whisperer followed, predictable yet terrifyingly agile, gliding through the fog with a grace that no animal could manage. I stumbled into a shallow depression near the creek, water seeping into my boots. My body was exhausted, muscles screaming, heart pounding like a drum of doom. And then I saw it. Or, more accurately, I felt it. Not in sight, not in hearing, but in the awareness that something had settled behind me, unseen yet impossibly close. I dared not move. Minutes, or maybe hours, passed, then silence. The forest held its breath. I didn't dare exhale. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the whispering returned. Not my name this time, not voices I recognized, but a language I could not understand. Alien, layered, and hypnotic. It was as if the forest itself were speaking through it. I took a gamble. Using every ounce of my training, I ran. Not blindly, but weaving, doubling back, masking my scent with mud and water, moving unpredictably. The whispering followed, echoing around me, mimicking every step, every falter. I could sense it testing me, teasing me, learning me faster than I could learn it. By dawn, I reached a slope leading to higher ground, a small ridge overlooking the creek. From there, I could see the forest stretching endlessly, fog curling like smoke over blackened moss and twisted trunks. I paused, lungs heaving, body trembling. The whisperer was gone, or at least it was invisible now. But I could feel it, an invisible weight pressing against my mind, patient, waiting for the next misstep. I collapsed against a tree, exhausted and shaken, scribbling my observations into my journal. My hands were raw, my vision blurred, and yet, even as sunlight filtered through the fog, casting weak, silvery beams across the forest floor, I knew I hadn't escaped. I had only survived, for now. Something moved in the mist, just beyond the ridge. I froze, heart hammering. The shape was distant, ambiguous, almost human, but elongated, unnatural. It stopped, head cocked at an impossible angle, and for a fleeting instant I could swear it was watching me, calculating, remembering. Then it melted into the fog, leaving only a whisper trailing behind, fading but unmistakable. Soon. I left the forest that day, moving carefully, erratically, never once looking back. But the memory of its gaze, the sound of its voice, and the knowledge of its patience haunt me still. Somewhere in the fog, in the twisted web of moss and trees, it waits. El Susurrante, the whisperer, is patient, and I know it will find me again. The forest is not empty, I am not safe. And the haunting certainty remains, the whisperer does not just stalk bodies. It stalks minds, memories, and fear. I survived, but I cannot escape the knowledge that it is still there, watching, learning, waiting. My name is Eric Varga, Captain, Hungarian Special Forces. I've served 12 years in hostile deserts, frozen borders, and ruined villages where silence was sometimes more lethal than the sound of gunfire. I am disciplined, rational, and more stubborn than wise, my old squad used to say. I'm in my late 30s now, and while scars knot my arms and ribs, my mind is sharper than it's ever been. That sharpness is what brought me here, though in hindsight, maybe I should have let it dull. I came to the Himalayan snow mountains not as a soldier this time, but as part of a private security contract. A small research station had gone silent. Officially, the station was meant to track glacial shifts, climate data, and seismic activity. Unofficially, whispers suggested they were also studying anomalies in the ice, odd magnetic spikes, strange voids where equipment went haywire. The United Nations didn't want to admit it, but they were nervous. When a station of 6 trained scientists and 2 armed escorts fell off the map, someone like me got the call. We flew by helicopter as far as we could, a skeleton team of 3 operators dropped with supplies and orders. The storm made sure we were isolated fast. The pilot couldn't linger, and by the time the rotor wash disappeared into the cloud bank, I already knew we wouldn't hear it again for a week. That was fine. Isolation didn't scare me. What did unsettle me was how the snow muted every sound except our breathing. It was as though the mountain itself was holding its breath, waiting. The air smelled like clean ice and iron, so sharp in my nose it almost burned. My gloves prickled with the cold no matter how tight I pulled them. Every exhale clouded my goggles, forcing me to wipe with a thumb until the moisture froze again. The wind wasn't constant. It came in strange, guttural bursts, like an animal coughing through the ridgelines. We located the research station by dusk, a squat steel structure half buried in snow, its antenna twisted sideways as if struck by something heavier than wind. The door hung ajar. Snow drifted halfway inside. No footprints, no tracks, just a yawning silence that pressed against my eardrums. "Looks abandoned for weeks," muttered Resnick, my second. He was Polish, barrel-chested, dependable, the kind of man who never wasted words. Our third was Medina from Colombia, fast-eyed and wiry, with a nervous grin that came out whenever the air felt wrong. "Or ours," I said, scanning the drifts. "Storm erases everything. Eyes sharp." We cleared the station methodically, weapons up, lights slicing through frost. Inside, the air was colder than outside, unnatural, as though something had sucked the heat from the steel. Frost bloomed along the walls, coating equipment in crystalline webs. Bunk beds stood empty but unmade. A coffee mug lay on the floor, frozen black liquid spilled like tar across the tiles. The generator was still running, low and sickly, humming in an irregular rhythm that made my molars ache. But no people. Not one. 8 humans had been living here, and all that remained were scraps, boots near the drying rack, a half-eaten tray of rations, a journal frozen open mid-sentence. The handwriting scrawled, "The sounds below us are not." And then the ink bled into nothing. That first night, I didn't sleep. I lay on my bunk, staring at the ceiling panels coated with frost, hearing the hum of the dying generator. It wasn't just the emptiness, it was the sensation that something was still here, just beyond reach. Every so often the pipes groaned as if a weight shifted beneath them. And once, around 300, I swear I heard a name whispered in the vent. Not in Hungarian, not in English, but in a tongue I felt in my spine. My name. I sat up fast, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the dark. Medina stirred, muttered something in Spanish, but didn't wake. Resnick snored steady, oblivious. I told myself fatigue plays tricks, that the cold carves hallucinations. Still, I didn't put the rifle down until the faint smear of dawn lit the frozen glass. On day 2, we explored the ice tunnels beneath the station, access shafts dug by the scientists for core samples. Narrow passages reinforced by steel ribs, walls glowing with trapped blue light. The deeper we went, the stranger it felt. Our compasses spun uselessly, radios hissed with static, even our wristwatches ticked slower. The air carried a deep vibration, like a heartbeat muffled by stone. At 20 meters down, Medina stopped, shining his beam across the ice. Something was embedded there. No, not something. Someone. A face. Not fresh, not ancient either. Human features distorted, eyes wide, mouth stretched in a scream that seemed to ripple beneath the frozen surface. I pressed my glove against it, half expecting it to be a trick of refraction, but the ice was smooth, solid. Resnick said nothing, just spat and muttered a prayer under his breath. Medina whispered, "Santa Madre de Dios?" His breath fogged the visor, his hand shaking on the flashlight. We retreated fast. None of us said it aloud, but all of us knew. If there was one face frozen mid-scream, there could be more. Back in the station, I tried to rationalize, perhaps a victim of an old expedition preserved by the ice, perhaps a hallucination. But my training told me something else. The stillness in this place wasn't passive. It was waiting. Testing. That night, the generator died entirely. The lights went black. The silence was total until, one by one, we heard footsteps pacing above us on the roof. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Deliberate, too heavy for snow settling. We froze. 3 soldiers with rifles pointed at the ceiling, breath pluming in the dark. Resnick mouthed, "How many?" I shook my head. It sounded like one. One impossibly heavy tread, circling. When the sound stopped, the silence that followed was worse than noise. We didn't move until dawn, not because we were cowards, but because when you're trained to survive, you learn patience is sometimes the only shield. Yet waiting in that dark, frost-bitten station with rifles pointed upward, listening for a sound that never came again, was worse than any firefight I'd endured. Combat is predictable in its chaos. This was a silence that thought. When the gray smear of morning light seeped through the frosted windows, we dared to breathe again. Medina muttered, "I swear it walked right above my bunk," while Resnick checked the roof hatch with a curt shake of his head. No tracks. No disturbance, just snow, smooth and untouched. But something had been up there. I'd stake my life on it. We spent the next hours restoring basic power. Medina rerouted the backup generator, coaxing a thin trickle of light into the mess hall. It barely lasted an hour before sputtering again, leaving us in intermittent glow and shadow. The cold pressed in heavier with each passing minute, seeping through boots, biting knuckles, burrowing into marrow. My breath hurt. My ribs ached with each inhale. It felt less like weather and more like intent. By midday, we had a decision: stay above and freeze, or return to the tunnels where, despite everything, the temperature had felt warmer. Resnick argued against it. The ice is hiding something. You felt it, like the walls listen. He was right, but staying meant death. Supplies wouldn't matter if the cold itself wanted us gone. So I made the call. We go down, one at a time, overlapping watch, document everything. If there's a chance the scientists left clues, it's there. Medina cursed softly, but slung his pack. Resnick just loaded a fresh mag and nodded. The descent felt different that day. The ribs of the shaft groaned louder, the ice glowed deeper blue, almost pulsing. I kept my gloved hand against the wall, telling myself the vibrations were natural seismic activity. But my palms swore otherwise. It was rhythm. Deliberate. At 30 meters down, we found the first real sign of the missing team. A camera, its lens cracked, frozen into the wall as though it had been pushed inside. Nearby, scrawled on the steel ribbing with something dark, maybe blood, maybe rust, were words in English. Don't listen. Don't follow. Medina snapped a picture. His hands shook. Resnick touched the letters with a frown. Don't listen to what? As if in answer, the ice itself groaned. A sound rose through the tunnel, low at first, then shaping, molding into syllables that pressed against the skull rather than the ear. Not a language I knew, not one any human should know, but I understood the cadence. It was calling names, not random ones. Ours, Eric, Resnick, Medina. Whispered, drawn out, vibrating in bone instead of air. We bolted upward, scrambled through the shaft like recruits under live fire. My chest burned, legs screaming as we pulled ourselves back into the station. We collapsed against the steel floor, gasping. No one spoke. We didn't need to. We'd all heard it. That night, sleep was impossible. Even with rifles across our chests, even with ears covered, I felt the voices pressing through the vents, through the frozen walls. They weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They waited, testing which one of us would respond. At 0200, Medina snapped. He sat up, eyes glassy, whispering, Si, Yavoy. His hands reached for his boots. I grabbed him by the collar, slammed him against the bunk. Who are you talking to? He blinked, confusion flickering. My sister, she's outside. I heard her. His breath shook, eyes wet. He wasn't lying. He believed it. Your sister's in Bogota, I snapped. This mountain doesn't know her. That's not her voice. For a moment, sanity returned to his gaze. Then he buried his face in his hands, shoulders trembling. Resnick muttered prayers under his breath, fingering the crucifix he wore under his thermals. I stayed awake the rest of the night, watching the frost creep further across the walls, the ice thickening in veins that seemed to pulse faintly. The next day, I forced us back down, not because I wanted to, but because sitting still was surrender. My training screamed at me. Intelligence is the only weapon against an unknown enemy. And this thing, this mountain, or whatever used the mountain as skin, wanted us blind. At 50 meters, the tunnel widened into a natural cavern. Our lights swept across jagged ice, each wall thick with frozen forms. Not one face, dozens. Scientists, mountaineers, perhaps centuries of wanderers who had vanished, all locked in screaming stillness. Their eyes glittered as our beams hit them, as though following. Medina whispered, Dios. Resnick crossed himself. I approached one of the nearest figures. A woman in a lab coat, her badge half visible under the frost. Dr. Emily Sorensen. One of the missing scientists. She hadn't died years ago. Her features were fresh, her skin pink beneath the ice, as though she'd been taken only yesterday. My hand trembled. I pressed gloved fingers against the ice over her cheek, warm. Resnick yanked me back. It wants us to touch, to stay. He was right, because even as my rational mind screamed to withdraw, a pull spread through me, a whisper coaxing, stay, rest, become still. The cold will keep you safe. I staggered, ripped my hand free, biting down until blood filled my mouth to break the trance. Back. Now. We retreated in silence, though silence didn't exist anymore. Every step echoed with whispers. They no longer spoke just our names. They whispered memories, things none of us had shared. Medina's first kiss, Resnick's father's last words, my mother's lullabies in Hungarian, that broke us in ways bullets never could. We collapsed in the mess hall, backs to steel, rifles across laps. Resnick finally looked me in the eye. This isn't ice, it's alive. I didn't argue, but I knew something worse. It wasn't just alive, it was learning. The storm outside thickened by the hour, battering the walls with fists of snow. The world beyond the station was gone, swallowed in whiteout. We were prisoners now, whether to the weather or the thing in the ice I couldn't tell. Resnick cleaned his rifle in silence, his hands steady but his jaw locked. Medina paced, muttering to himself, stopping at the frosted windows as though expecting to see someone waiting outside. I tried to keep control of the situation, but every order I gave, every tactical suggestion rang hollow in my own head. How do you fight something that doesn't bleed? By late afternoon, the voices began again. Not whispers this time, but overlapping echoes that filled the air like smoke. They didn't come from the vents or walls anymore. They came from inside us. My thoughts weren't my own. A memory of Budapest in summer turned sour, twisted by alien syllables threaded through it. My mother's face melted into frost, her lips whispering words I didn't understand yet couldn't ignore. Captain. Resnick's voice snapped me back. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the ceiling. Boots, heavy, deliberate, crunching across the roof again. Back and forth, pacing as though measuring us. I signaled silently. We moved into position, rifles up, breaths controlled. My pulse slowed into combat rhythm. Training overtook panic. If it wanted to come inside, we'd be ready. The roof hatch rattled once, twice, then stopped. Silence pressed again. My finger curled on the trigger, sweat freezing against my temple. Medina broke first. I can't take this. He slung his rifle, grabbed a flare from the crate, and stormed toward the door. Stand down, I barked. He didn't listen. He yanked the door open, light spilling against the storm. For a second, nothing but blinding snow. Then, movement. A shadow, human-shaped, standing maybe 20 meters away. Hermana! Medina shouted, stumbling into the snow, flare hissing red in his hand. I lunged after him, boots sinking deep, cold slicing my lungs raw. Resnick covered from the doorway, rifle raised. The figure didn't move. It stood perfectly still against the storm, like a cutout pressed into white fabric. Medina, stop! I roared, but he didn't. He reached the figure, dropped to his knees, sobbing. My beam cut through the snow and hit ice. It wasn't his sister. It wasn't anyone. It was another frozen body, half buried, arm outstretched as if clawing upward. Medina clung to it, weeping, until the ice beneath his knees cracked. Resnick! Cover! I sprinted forward, grabbed Medina by the harness, yanking him back just as the ground collapsed. A hollow moan echoed from the fissure, like 1,000 throats exhaling at once. Resnick opened fire into the snow, muzzle flashes strobing the storm. Not because there was a target, because the shadows in the snow moved. I saw them too. Shapes that didn't walk, didn't crawl, but shifted. Like pieces of the storm itself had decided to stalk us. We dragged Medina inside, slammed the door, barred it with a steel beam. His eyes were wide, wild. She was there. I saw her. She needed me. I shook him hard enough, his teeth clacked. That was not your sister. That was bait. Resnick slammed a fresh mag into his rifle. It's hunting us. I didn't answer. The truth was obvious. That night, no one slept. We huddled in the dark, rifles across our laps, listening. The storm outside grew quieter. That should have been relief, but it wasn't, because in the quiet, I could hear the ice again, cracking, shifting, whispering our names. It wasn't just beneath us anymore. It was inside the walls, above the ceiling, surrounding the station like a tightening fist. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps on the steel door, perfectly human, perfectly deliberate. My blood froze hotter than fire. Resnick aimed, teeth bared. Medina whimpered. The knock came again. And then a voice, clear, familiar. Captain Varga, open up, we need help. I knew that voice. It was Corporal Janos, a man who died under my command in Syria 6 years ago. He'd been cut apart by shrapnel, and I had zipped the bag myself. Resnick's eyes flicked to me, silently asking, "Orders?" I didn't move. Couldn't. My legs were stone. The voice persisted, softer now, pleading. "It's cold out here, Captain. Don't leave me again." Medina clapped his hands over his ears. "Make it stop." I forced my throat to work. "It's not real," I whispered. "None of it is real." But my chest clenched with guilt all the same. The thing knew. It had plucked the deepest scar from my past and sharpened it into a blade. Hours passed. The voice faded. The knock stopped. But the silence left behind was worse, because it meant the game was still on. By dawn, Resnick's face looked hollow, his eyes sunken. Medina rocked back and forth, muttering prayers. I studied the frost spreading across the station walls. It wasn't random anymore. It was branching, curling into patterns that almost looked like veins or words. That's when I realized it wasn't just freezing the station. It was growing, and it wanted us inside it. The frost spread faster than fire. By morning, entire panels of the mess hall wall were covered in crystalline webs, branching out like nerves across steel. When my gloved fingers brushed it, the frost pulsed faintly, as though something inside was alive and moving. We couldn't stay above. Supplies were dwindling. The air itself felt colder than the mountain should allow. The station wasn't just freezing, it was being consumed, which left us only one direction. Down, into the tunnels again. Resnick hated the plan, but didn't argue. Medina barely responded. His eyes had that hollow glaze, the look of a man half lost to whatever whisper crawled through his skull. I strapped extra magazines to my vest, tightened my gloves, forced my mind into the rigid calm of combat preparation. We weren't going down to explore anymore. We were going down to confront. The shaft groaned as we descended. Each rib we passed was rimed with frost, the steel shrieking faintly as though under immense pressure. My boots crunched on the ice with every step, and beneath that crunch came another sound. Breathing. Not ours. Not human. 50 meters. 60. The cavern opened again, the frozen faces watching us in their eternal scream. But this time, the cavern was not silent. The ice moved. Hairline cracks raced across the walls, glowing faintly blue. Shapes shifted just beneath the surface, half seen, a hand pressing outward, then vanishing. A face rising close, whispering words that bled through the skull. My name again, over and over. Captain. Resnick's voice was low, strained. He pointed his rifle. At the center of the cavern, the ice bulged outward like something inside was pressing, desperate to be born. Frost cracked in spiderwebs, releasing sharp snaps that echoed like gunfire. Medina whimpered, clutching his head. Then the bulge split. Something emerged, not fully, not whole, but enough to make every nerve in my body scream. It wasn't a creature in the way a wolf or bear is. It was formless, a mass of ice and shadow and memory stitched together. Faces rippled across its surface. Sorensen, Janos, Medina's sister, mouths opening and closing, whispering in unison. I fired first. Resnick followed. Our rifles roared, brass clattering across the ice. Bullets cracked chunks off the surface, but the thing didn't retreat. It absorbed the impacts, fractures glowing brighter, as if we were feeding it. The whispers turned into a single voice, layered but unified. Stay, join, rest. Medina screamed, dropped his rifle, and stumbled forward. The thing reached for him, not with arms, but with a shifting tendril of ice that snaked across the floor faster than thought. Contact left, I roared, switching to full auto. The rounds shredded the tendril, shards exploding into glittering dust. Resnick grabbed Medina, hauling him back. His eyes bled at the corners, nose running red. We can't fight this, Resnick shouted. He was right. Bullets weren't enough, but retreat meant being swallowed in silence. My mind clawed for options, anything from training. Fire. Heat. Ice hates fire. Thermite, I yelled. Resnick blinked, then cursed, because we hadn't brought enough to burn out a cavern, only to breach steel. Still, a charge was a charge. We backpedaled, laying down suppressive fire against something that didn't flinch. Resnick yanked the thermite charge from his pack, slapped it against the cavern wall. The hiss was immediate, violent, red fire spraying sparks across the ice. The thing screamed. Not sound, a vibration that rattled every bone, shredded my thoughts. The frozen faces rippled, twisted in agony, their mouths stretching wider. The cavern shook, fissures splitting upward toward the shaft. Move! I shoved Resnick and Medina ahead, boots pounding back up the tunnel. The fire behind us hissed and roared, the thing's scream echoing like thunder. We climbed, lungs burning, every rib groaning with effort. Behind, I could feel it following, the cold rushing upward, faster than legs, faster than thought. Resnick slipped near the shaft, his boot catching on a rib. I hauled him up by the harness, Medina scrambling blindly ahead. We burst into the station just as the tunnel walls groaned, the fire dying with a hiss, and the cold surged back stronger than ever. The frost now covered half the station walls. Veins of ice crept across the floor, curling toward us like fingers. Medina collapsed in a corner, rocking. Resnick slumped, sweat freezing on his face. I stood in the center, rifle trembling in my hands. My training screamed at me to form a plan, adapt, overcome. But this wasn't insurgents or snipers. This was something that thought in silence, that spoke in memory, that wore faces like masks. The frost pulsed once, glowing faintly, and I heard it again. My name, clear, inside my skull. Eric, you cannot leave. The frost on the floor crept closer, curling into tendrils that pulsed faintly as though they carried blood instead of ice. The station groaned, every rivet straining under invisible weight. I stood still, rifle raised, but deep down I knew the weapon was little more than a comfort. This thing didn't fear bullets. Resnick leaned against the wall, his face pale, blood seeping from one nostril. He clutched his crucifix tight, whispering in Polish. Medina was worse, eyes vacant, lips moving as though reciting a prayer or answering someone only he could hear. Then the voices came again, not whispers this time, louder, clearer. The walls themselves vibrated with them. Eric, Resnick, Medina. They spoke our names with precision, each syllable shaped in a dozen different tones at once. Then, choose, stay, join. The frost pulsed with each word, veins glowing blue. It wanted us not as prey, not as corpses, but as part of it. No, Resnick rasped, gripping his rifle. We fight, we die as men. But I wasn't ready to die, not like this. I forced my breathing into control, searching every corner of memory, every page of training manuals drilled into my skull. Fire had hurt it. Heat could disrupt its growth. But we had almost no thermite left. Only one charge remained. Resnick, I said sharply, how much fuel in the backup generator? He blinked, thought, then cursed. Enough to run 2 hours at most. Then we don't use it for power. I turned to the supply crate, tearing through until I found what I hoped would be there. Emergency flares, compressed gas canisters, rags, crude tools, but tools all the same. Resnick's eyes widened as he understood. Improvised incendiaries. Exactly. We worked fast, hands shaking in the freezing air. I ripped cloth into strips, stuffed them into canisters, primed them with flare heads. Resnick wired the thermite to a manual trigger, sweat dripping despite the cold. Medina rocked in the corner, whispering. I wanted to drag him into the plan, force him back into reality, but his eyes were gone, clouded, wet, lost. The frost crawled faster, tendrils rising like spears. One brushed Resnick's boot, and he yanked it back with a curse. The thing knew what we were doing. Then the voices shifted, no longer commanding, pleading. Eric, stay. Be warm. No pain. No war. Rest. My throat tightened. It wasn't just whispering memories anymore. It was offering peace. An end to the years of combat, the faces of men I'd buried, the guilt I carried like shrapnel. It knew exactly where to strike. Resnick saw my hesitation. Captain. His voice was raw, urgent. It's a lie, I nodded, but my chest burned with the weight of temptation. The walls shuddered. Ice cracked down the hallway. A figure pressed against the frost. My mother, her eyes kind, her lips mouthing words I'd longed to hear for decades. Come home, Eric. I clenched my jaw so hard I thought my teeth would shatter. Raised the first improvised incendiary. Lit it. Through. The explosion was crude but violent, fire rolling across the floor, consuming frost in sizzling waves. The walls screamed, not with metal stress, but with a chorus of voices howling in agony. The face of my mother melted into blackened cracks. Resnick triggered the thermite. The blast shook the mess hall, molten sparks cascading across the steel. The frost recoiled, retreating like wounded flesh. For the first time since arrival, I felt the temperature rise. "Move!" I shouted. We dragged Medina to his feet, hauling him through the station as fire consumed the walls. The frost writhed, faces screaming, voices shrieking in fury. The ground trembled, ice splitting underfoot. We reached the main hatch, slammed it open into the storm. The cold outside was brutal, slicing my lungs raw, but it was natural cold, not the thinking silence behind us. Resnick and I half-carried Medina into the whiteout, stumbling down the ridge. Behind us, the station groaned, flames licking through windows, voices wailing as the frost fought against the fire. Snow blinded us, wind howled, but I didn't stop until the station was a shadow swallowed in white. My lungs burned, my legs shook, and still I forced us forward. Resnick staggered beside me, his face twisted with exhaustion and rage. Medina muttered nonsense, his boots dragging. At last, we collapsed in the lee of a ridge, snow piling against us, the world reduced to white sky and endless breath. Resnick looked at me, eyes hollow. "We heard it, but it's not gone." He was right. The voices still whispered, faint even here. The frost still pulsed faintly under the snow at our feet. I stared into the storm, heart hammering, and realized the truth that froze me deeper than the wind. We hadn't escaped it. We had only carried it with us. Snow swallowed us whole. Hours passed, maybe more. My watch had stopped, its second hand twitching in place, stuck in the same way our compasses spun uselessly. Resnick and I dragged Medina between us until our strength gave out, collapsing into a shallow hollow carved by wind. We huddled there, backs to the slope, the storm gnawing at us like teeth. The fire from the station had dimmed into nothing. I couldn't tell if the flames had been smothered or if the snow had buried it, but I knew the truth. We hadn't destroyed the thing. We'd only forced it back, bought time. The whispers proved it. They still threaded through the wind, faint but persistent, as though the storm carried them. Eric, Resnick, Medina. Softer now, patient. Resnick spat into the snow, eyes bloodshot. "It's inside our heads now. Doesn't matter how far we run." I didn't argue. He was right. My ears rang with echoes that weren't there, with lullabies my mother had sung, with screams of soldiers I'd lost. And deeper still, beneath the noise, was something steady, a heartbeat that wasn't mine, a rhythm that matched the mountain's tremors. I forced myself to think like a soldier, survival, not surrender. We need shelter, a cave, a ridge, anything to break the wind. Resnick nodded. We heaved Medina back onto his feet, though he was more dead weight than man now. His lips moved constantly, whispering to someone we couldn't see. Sometimes his tone was gentle, like speaking to a loved one. Sometimes frantic, bargaining. We stumbled through the whiteout, visibility reduced to a few meters. Every shadow in the storm looked like a figure waiting. My chest burned with every breath, ice forming in my beard, blood thickening in my veins. I'd faced enemy fire, I'd crawled through minefields, but nothing in my life had felt as close to death as the emptiness of that storm. At last, we found it. A fissure in the rock wall, half hidden by snow. Not deep, but enough to shield us from the worst of the wind. We dragged ourselves inside, collapsing in a heap. For the first time in hours, silence pressed around us. But it wasn't empty silence. The fissure walls glittered with veins of ice. And in those veins, faintly visible, were shapes, faces, watching. Resnick cursed, raising his rifle. I grabbed his arm. "No, waste of ammo. We need heat." I tore open my pack, hands fumbling, pulling out the last of our flares. 3 left. Resnick set one in the center, igniting it. The red glow filled the fissure, shadows dancing. The ice faces seemed to recoil, their features melting into the stone. The warmth was slight, but enough. Enough to thaw our fingers, enough to remind us what fire felt like. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew clearer. "You carry us." The words rattled in my skull, making my teeth ache. Resnick heard them too. I saw it in the way his eyes widened. "You are vessels," Medina moaned, his voice echoing theirs. "Si, I'll stay. I'll stay." That was when it struck me. The frost hadn't just been consuming the station. It had touched us, crept into our boots, brushed our skin, seeped into every pore. We hadn't escaped carrying nothing. We'd carried it. Resnick met my eyes. The realization passed between us unspoken. We were infected. Not with a disease, but with a presence. My chest tightened, breath hitching. If we made it back to civilization, if we reached the extraction point, if a helicopter took us out, we wouldn't be leaving it behind. We'd be delivering it. Resnick's hand went to his rifle. His expression was carved from stone. We can't let that happen. He meant us. He meant me. I raised my own rifle before he could point his. Our barrels stared at each other, two men who'd fought side by side, now calculating whether death was mercy. Not yet, I said, voice low, steady. We don't know how deep it's in us. We don't know if it can survive away from the mountain. Resnick's jaw worked, his crucifix shaking in his grip. At last, he lowered the barrel, barely. Medina twitched in the corner, his whispers rising into frantic laughter. His eyes glowed faintly in the flare light, pupils dilated until no iris remained. Resnick and I froze. The thing was speaking through him. You cannot burn it out. You cannot kill it. You are ours now. Medina's mouth stretched wider than it should, his teeth chattering against each other in a rhythm that matched the mountain's heartbeat. His body jerked, puppet-like, as though strings pulled from inside the ice. I lunged forward, slamming him against the rock, pressing my forearm into his throat. His eyes rolled, the whispers pouring from his mouth like smoke. Resnick raised his rifle, but I barked. Don't! He's still in there. But was he? Medina's lips cracked into a grin that wasn't his. His voice was layered with dozens, hundreds of others. If you kill him, another will speak. If you run, we follow. If you live, we spread. The flare sputtered, shrinking to embers. Shadows thickened around us. I pressed harder, heart hammering, until Medina gasped and the whispers faltered. His eyes fluttered, some clarity flickering through. Captain, he rasped, voice his own for a heartbeat. Kill me. Please. The flare hissed out. Darkness swallowed us whole, and in that blackness the mountain whispered one final truth. You cannot escape. Darkness pressed like a weight on my chest. The flare had burned to ash, leaving only the stench of sulfur and smoke. In the black, Medina wheezed beneath my arm, his body jerking with spasms that weren't his own. Resnick's breathing rasped nearby, steady but ragged, rifle clutched in both hands. Captain, Resnick said, his voice hollow. You heard him. He asked for it. The words were true, but my hands shook anyway. Medina's throat was hot under my forearm, his pulse fluttering like a trapped bird. A comrade, a soldier, someone who had trusted me to lead. Kill me, Medina croaked again, his voice shredded, breaking through layers of whispers. Please, before it takes me fully. The ice pulsed faintly along the fissure walls, its glowing veins in the dark. Faces pressed outward, mouths opening in silent screams, and their whispers slid back into my skull. Do it. Spill him. Join us. I couldn't tell anymore if the voices were urging me to kill to weaken us or if Medina's plea was real. Resnick's patience snapped. The click of his rifle safety echoed loud. If you won't, I will. I shoved Medina away, slamming him against the rock. Not yet. Resnick's eyes glared in the faint light, wild. You're risking everything. Every village, every city, every family out there. If this thing spreads... I know, I hissed. But I won't kill him while he's still fighting. Resnick's teeth clenched, but he lowered the barrel. Barely. We sat in that cavern, the cold gnawing through our bones, the whispers weaving deeper into our minds. I stared at Medina's twitching body, watching his lips murmur names and memories not his own. My mother's lullabies spilled from his mouth, words in Hungarian he couldn't possibly know. Resnick's father's voice followed, then strangers we'd never met. All folded into him, a chorus. I closed my eyes, forced myself into the soldier's calm I'd built across a dozen battlefields. Options. Assess. Act. We had 2 flares left. 1 thermite charge gone, ammunition low, no radio. The storm outside still screamed, though lighter now, no longer a white wall, but a shifting veil. Escape was possible. Maybe. But the truth coiled inside my chest like a snake. Escape might not mean survival. Escape might mean contamination. I looked at Resnick. If we make it back, we tell no one. No scientists, no commanders. No one. This dies with us. His jaw tightened. You're asking me to carry a secret no one will believe. I'm asking you to keep the world alive. He didn't answer, but he didn't argue either. Hours bled into something close to morning. The storm's scream dulled to a steady wind. Faint lights seeped through the fissure mouth. The world outside was still deadly, but navigable. We move, I ordered. Resnick hauled Medina up. He stumbled like a puppet, his eyes glazed. The whispers poured through him with every step, but we forced him forward, through snow waist-deep, down ridges slick with ice. My body screamed with exhaustion, lungs shredded raw, but the thought of staying one more hour in that fissure was worse than death. The mountains stretched endless in every direction, jagged peaks stabbing through clouds. No smoke marked the station, just white silence. My heart sank. Without landmarks, we were blind. Then, faint in the distance, a sound. The thrum of blades. A helicopter. Resnick's eyes snapped up, his mouth parting in disbelief. Extraction. I didn't let myself feel relief. The timing was too sharp, too perfect. Still, the sound grew louder, real enough that snow dusted from the ridge with each pulse. I signaled, waving a flare into the sky. The red light cut through the storm, casting shadows that writhed across the drifts. The helicopter emerged from the clouds, black and angular, rotor wash scattering snow. My chest clenched. Salvation or doom. Medina laughed suddenly, high and cracked. They'll take us home. They'll take us everywhere. The voices echoed his laughter, rising in triumph inside my skull. Resnick saw it too. He turned to me, face ashen, and raised his rifle, pointing not at Medina this time, but at me. If we step on that bird, he said, voice trembling, we end the world. My hands tightened on my weapon. We stood there, two soldiers in the snow, the helicopter descending, Medina laughing with voices that weren't his. The wind whipped between us, carrying the scent of oil and frost and blood. I met Resnick's eyes. You trust me? His jaw shook. I did. Then trust me now. The helicopter dropped lower, skids brushing the ridge. A crewman waved us forward, his face wrapped in goggles and scarf. Behind him, the interior yawned dark. Medina screamed, thrashing, his voice splitting into a dozen. Take us! Take us! Resnick's finger hovered on the trigger, and for the first time in my life, I didn't know if survival was victory or damnation. The rotor wash hammered against my chest, scattering snow into a furious cyclone. The helicopter hovered only meters away, its crewmen shouting through the wind, arms beckoning us forward. The black shape promised life, warmth, escape. And yet, the closer it came, the stronger the whispers pressed into my skull. They surged with the rhythm of the blades, louder, layered with Medina's hysterical laughter. Take us! Take us! Take us! Resnick's rifle never wavered, barrel pointed at my heart. If you step on that bird, Captain, you damn us all. The words cut deeper than the cold. I had led men into ambushes, through firefights, out of nightmares, but never had survival itself felt like betrayal. I looked at Medina, thrashing in Resnick's grip, his mouth stretched in that unnatural grin. The voices poured from him, echoing in a dozen languages. Home. Spread. Warmth for all. My stomach turned. This wasn't just a predator. It wasn't content to haunt the mountain. It wanted expansion. The crewman waved again, urgency clear. He couldn't see what I saw. To him, we were 3 soldiers in need of rescue. To me, we were carriers. Vessels. Resnick's eyes burned into me. You're the one who decides, Captain. Always have been. But if you choose wrong... His finger tightened on the trigger. I won't let you. The wind roared. Medina screamed. The mountain groaned beneath us. And in that chaos, my decision crystallized. I turned, slamming my rifle butt into Resnick's chest. He staggered back, his shot cracking wide into the snow. In the same motion, I grabbed Medina by the harness and dragged him forward. The voices shrieked in triumph, spilling from him like smoke. The crewman reached for us, then froze. His eyes widened as he heard it too, the chorus spilling from Medina. He shouted something to the pilot, but it was too late. Medina lunged, strength not his own, hands clawing toward the open cabin. Resnick roared behind me, firing. The round took Medina through the shoulder, spinning him sideways. He screamed, voices twisting into fury, the mountain itself shaking in reply. I didn't think. I acted. With a strength born from terror I hauled Medina to the edge of the ridge and threw him into the abyss. His scream carried down the slopes, fading into the howling wind. For a moment, silence followed. Then the mountain answered. The ice split with a sound like thunder. Cracks raced down the ridges, fissures glowing blue. The whispers didn't fade with Medina's body. They surged as though the entire glacier howled in rage. The helicopter lurched upward, panicked by the quake. The crewmen scrambled back into the cabin, shouting at us to board now or be left behind. Resnick stared at me, horror in his eyes. "You killed him." "I saved us," I snapped, though the words tasted like ash. The fissures widened. Ice collapsed into the valley below, avalanches roaring. If we didn't board, we'd be buried. Resnick hesitated only a moment before following. We dove into the helicopter as it lifted, and the skids barely clearing the ridge before the entire slope collapsed in white fury. Inside, the roar of the rotors filled my ears, but the whispers didn't stop. They pressed through the steel, faint but clear. "You are ours still." Resnick sat across from me, rifle limp in his hands, his eyes fixed on me as though weighing whether to put a round in my chest right there. The crewman strapped himself in, shouting questions neither of us answered. I closed my eyes, tried to breathe, but the truth gnawed deeper than the cold ever had. The mountain hadn't needed Medina to spread. It had touched all of us. Resnick. Me. The whispers weren't fading, they were growing stronger the farther we flew. For the first time since stepping onto that cursed ice, I felt real fear. Not of death, not of failure, but of what I carried inside me. What we might carry back to the world. Resnick leaned forward, voice low, deadly. "If we hear it again back home, Captain, I'll put a bullet in both of us. Understand?" I met his eyes, nodded once. The helicopter banked west, leaving the mountains swallowed in storm behind us. But I knew it wasn't left behind at all. It was coming with us. The helicopter carried us west, its nose dipping through clouds heavy with snow. The storm fell away, revealing jagged ridges bathed in thin sunlight. For a moment, just a heartbeat, it almost felt like we had left it behind. Resnick sat across from me, jaw clenched, eyes locked on mine as if daring me to betray even a flicker of weakness. He hadn't lowered his rifle. Not really. It lay across his lap, safety off, barrel angled toward the deck, but ready to rise at any sign. The crewman tried to ask questions. What had happened to the station? Where the others were? Why we looked like men dragged from hell? But neither of us spoke. We stared at each other, silence between us louder than the rotors. I closed my eyes, pressing my head against the vibrating bulkhead, and listened. Not for the helicopter's roar, not for Resnick's breath, for the whispers. They were still there, faint, patient. "You are ours." When the bird touched down at a forward outpost, Resnick and I stepped onto gravel and diesel fumes, blinded by the sudden brightness. Men in parkas rushed forward, helping us down. The smell of kerosene filled my lungs, too sharp, too hot compared to the frozen air of the mountain. For the first time in days, I felt warmth, and yet I didn't feel human again. Resnick leaned close as medics moved to examine us. "Remember what I said, Captain. If it follows, if you hear it when the wind isn't blowing, I'll end us both." I wanted to argue. I wanted to cling to the soldier's illusion that we could fight, contain, resist. But in my gut, I already knew. That night, they gave us beds in a heated barracks, food that wasn't frozen rations, coffee that scalded my tongue. I should have slept. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. And then, just as my eyelids fluttered, I heard it. Not in the wind, not in the vents, inside my skull. Eric. I sat bolt upright, sweat running cold down my back. Across the room, Resnick lay stiff, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. He'd heard it too. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The whispers didn't stop. They slid through memory, through thought, seeding themselves deeper. Lullabies, prayers, screams. Not just ours anymore. Others. New voices. The barracks door creaked. A medic checked in, flashlight beam sweeping. "You two all right?" Resnick's finger twitched near his rifle. I shook my head. He lowered it. The medic left. The whispers stayed. By morning, we looked like men who hadn't slept in years. The commander debriefed us, demanded answers. Resnick said nothing. I spoke half-truths. Avalanche, equipment failure, hostile conditions. He didn't believe me, but paperwork prefers neat explanations. When they dismissed us, Resnick pulled me aside, face pale. "It's spreading." I didn't ask how he knew, because I knew it too. In the hall, two soldiers laughed at a joke, but their cadence bent just slightly into the rhythm of the mountain's heartbeat. In the mess, a cook hummed under his breath a tune my mother used to sing. It had followed us. Or worse, it had become us. That night, Resnick loaded his rifle. He stood over my bed, crucifix dangling, his face carved with despair. Now, before it's too late. I stared at him, heart hammering. "If you kill me, Resnick, how do you know you're not carrying it too?" He froze. His hands shook. Slowly, he lowered the rifle. We didn't speak again. Days passed. The base carried on. Helicopters came and went. Orders filtered through radios. Men laughed, fought, ate. Normal. But I saw it. In their eyes, in their pauses, in the way their voices carried echoes they shouldn't. The thing didn't need the mountain anymore. It had its vessels. It had us. Sometimes I wonder if it wanted to be found. If the scientists hadn't stumbled into a prison, but into a door meant to be opened. If Resnick and I weren't survivors, but couriers. Now, when the wind shifts at night, the barracks walls hum with frost. Not much, just veins crawling outward like nerves searching for new skin. No one else notices. Not yet. But they will, and when they do, it will be too late. Because we didn't escape the mountain. We brought the mountain home.